Hey everyone, welcome to Not Dialogue Choices podcast, where we don't talk or make choice. Bad intro. Anyway, I played Signalis and I binged it in like 2 or 3 days, and Toaster has been pushing me to play it for months, for a long time, and I figured we could talk about it because it has like an ambiguous ending, and I was kind of at a loss at the end about what exactly to talk about, and Toaster's been overflowing with thoughts about this game, so I figured we'd do this now. We're recording this before the series has even started to air because it's still fresh in my memory, and I'm just gonna schedule this to go up after you guys have all seen the whole thing, I guess. But this game was a trip.
Yeah, I love this game with like a fiery passion, and I was really not expecting to love it nearly as much as I did. So I guess a little bit of my background on it. Signalis was like the second or third game I'd ever streamed. And I was still using like my old model and was still kind of figuring out my stream. So I don't have like a stream VOD for it or anything. But I went into it completely blind. All I'd heard was it's kind of like Resident Evil, and it's like about cyborgs or like androids. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And what I ended up getting was like this crazy mishmash of influences, cyberpunk, and like literary horror that was essentially influenced by like a ton of like art films and anime series and like really highbrow stuff that I really like in general. And yeah, it just ended up being a game like truly like made for me specifically in terms of like what it was trying to go for and how it was presenting itself. And I knew none of that going in, so it was just a totally joyous experience, and it became this game that I could not stop thinking about for, I mean, months now since I played it. I think about Signalis like almost every day. I've bought it for people. I've gotten it as a gift for a bunch of people. Like it is truly something that I think everyone needs to play. And dare I say, it might be the culmination of, if not my personal favorite survival horror game, at least of its style ever. I think it is marvelous. Oh, wow. It is an achievement. So
yeah, I think I went in only knowing that it was like a survival horror game that had a radio. That was my level of understanding when I went in.
Yeah,
I had some very varied expectations, right? I wasn't sure what was going on. Like I immediately at the very beginning of the game started thinking, after I'd already like fought several things and kind of gone through a whole level, I was immediately thinking of, to use a kind of trite example, like the Black Mirror episode where they trick soldiers into fighting people by just dehumanizing them by, like using AR to show them as like monsters and so on. So yeah. Early on I was like, what if everybody here is not this and I'm just killing people? And I immediately was like, oh no, do you get the good ending by only, because this was actually brought on by mechanics, which is that I was not struggling to avoid most of the fights, and then I would just shoot the handful of people that were in really annoying choke points or would trap me in a room or something. And I hit a point where I'm like, they keep giving me more fucking stun rods, and I don't know what to do with these. Because you only have 6 inventory slots, so anything you're not actively using all the time is a huge burden for you. So I went almost the entire game never using thermite, never using stun rods, never using like any of the bonusy items, because like they were not worth carrying because of how little space you have, especially when you start needing to have the flashlight most of the time, which just is a burden on your inventory. Like you're like, oh, I can't wait to get a flashlight, and then the moment you get a flashlight, you're like, this sucks. It took a whole slot for me forever because this thing that she puts in her head somehow takes up inventory space. So like an hour or two in, when I was realizing how many stun rods I had backlogged, I'm like, oh, am I supposed to pacifist run this entire game to get like the real ending, and I'm going to be revealed to be a horrible monster at the end because I've been killing anyone that's actively a problem. Like I genuinely avoided like all combat for a while. Like they kept setting up like vaguely like those like Bioshocky, Dead Spacey sort of like vignettes where there's a creepy person doing a scripted thing in a location, and every single time, like there's definitely players that would just attack on sight because obvious monster, but I just kept like sliding into the walls and just disappearing past enemies for like the entire like, I think it took me like an hour to kill something because you could just skip every fight, not even by like Resident Evil evasion, but just avoiding detection entirely, which was a surprise for me.
Yep.
Like I was shocked how much stealth was a thing in this game.
Yeah. I guess that gets to like the first thing we should talk about, which is like gameplay, right? Signalis is a top-down, sort of isometrically styled PS1 throwback survival horror game, but it has all of these like modern quality of life things attached to it as well. So it's like you have both tank controls, which I played with, and modern controls where you can just move around. But you also have things like enemies don't just like magnet to you. Like you can walk around environments and they won't see you. You have a sort of like auto lock on sort of feature that resembles Resident Evil's sort of tank controls aiming, while also giving you a really generous auto aim that will kind of lock onto characters, sometimes for better and for worse. And
for me, it was almost exclusively for the worst. Like I got incredibly frustrated by the game's combat.
And then you also have like the quick kills feature. So one of the main gameplay elements that Keith has already kind of spoken about was the fact that you get stun rods and you get thermite. So much like in the very first Resident Evil game, you can use like lighters and gasoline to burn corpses. You can use thermite to get rid of corpses. So that,
and specifically, that was the Crimson Heads were added to the remake, right? That wasn't in the original Resident Evil 1 or anything up till that point. It was their surprise as you're replaying an old game, and their twist was that enemies would just get back up and be way worse.
Yeah. So basically, the thermite and the stun rods act as defensive items, the same way that daggers did in the RE remake, where you can kind of go up to enemies, and if they grapple you, you can kill them. The only thing is in Signalis, you can do it more proactively. If you walk up to an enemy with a stun rod or thermite equipped, you can press, I guess on controller, it's R1. On PC, it's Q, I think, on keyboard and mouse, to just jab them with the item. And you can use that with thermite. People don't know that. People think that thermite's only for corpses, but no, you can just instant kill an enemy with thermite and it will burn their body as well.
I didn't know that.
If you group enemies up together, you can thermite one of them, and if they fall on the corpses, it will thermite all of them. So thermite is like actually the quick kill weapon in the game. It's the item you should use if you want to permanently get rid of an obstacle. Stun rods will just instant kill an enemy, but it won't prevent them from turning into Crimson Heads later. So another one of those cool kind of quality of life remake features. But you brought up a few things that I think are really cool, and it begins to segue into kind of what Signalis is doing and what makes it both an homage to old survival horror games, which I think is not only thematically relevant, but just like really cool, but also its own thing. You mentioned you only have 6 item slots in your inventory. This might seem like it's just trying to be a restrictive old game, but this is actually directly referencing Resident Evil 1. It's Chris's inventory. Chris only has 6 inventory slots, so you also only have 6 inventory slots. They tie this into the narrative in an interesting way. They say, the game takes place in a galactic war between multiple planets, and you are part of a galactic empire where basically it's a fascist place. It's there. I think there's an empire and then like a people's revolution, and you're part of the people's revolution. But unfortunately, this revolution has sort of been taken over by authoritarian sort of fascism. So, you'll find like propaganda posters that are like, private property is a privilege, only carry a few items, and so that's how they do it. The characters are in canon trying to travel light. They're trying to be modest.
The setting hates property, and it hates artists and expression and individuality.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too, right? Because let's get to the biggest themes surrounding this game. And this is something I've wanted to talk about for a really long time. Signalis is a game that, as a property, it is paying homage to things that came before it, right? Like, it has this like top-down Metal Gear styled camera. It has these PS1 graphics. Aesthetically speaking, it calls back to things like Blade Runner. All of the propaganda in the world is written dually in, I think, Chinese and German. I think there's some Japanese around as well, but it looked Chinese to me. I didn't see much hiragana or katakana. And that's like the same thing that happened in Blade Runner, where like the characters speak this like pidgin of like German and Hungarian and Turkish and Chinese and Japanese, which is really cool. You also have the cutscenes and the visual direction, which is very inspired by anime, really specifically stuff like Ghost in the Shell, but also the Monogatari series. I think the thing that takes most people by surprise is like how cryptic and like quote unquote artistic or artsy the cutscene direction is. But all of that takes cues directly from directors like Aki Kishimbo of Shaft fame. Shaft is the animation studio that made Monogatari. And so you get this really weird mishmash of homages that are also very subtly iterated on. Because the game, it's very easy to look at it and say, okay, Signalis is Resident Evil by way of Metal Gear and Monogatari, right? And you can sell the game. A way of looking at the game
that makes it your worst fear, which is like Lone Survivor, which is just like an amalgam of things you like, but doesn't do anything with them.
Exactly, right? Like, it's very easy to sort of Ready Player One the references in this game. And it's very easy to look at it from the surface and just dismiss it as like, oh, this game is doing nothing new. It's just kind of aping things that have been done before. But then we get into the actual story of Signalis, which directly is about kind of iterative art and what it means to be a creator and an individual that is expressing themselves and becoming themselves through the long line of like other individuals who also tried to express themselves and be themselves, and like what it means to evolve from legacy. Should we summarize the plot at all? Could you summarize the plot? Do you think you could?
You want to hear my attempt at remembering the plot for my first run?
Yeah.
Okay, so a mistake potentially is to try to summarize this as the chronological events we witness versus what the actual chronological events are. But like, God, we start off with I'm trying to remember the vision or the tutorial. But that was canon on some level, yeah. It was a thing that for a while I was questioning whether or not it was real events because of the fact that you just skip to somewhere else afterwards. But you start off on a ship where where you are a replica, and there's something called a gestalt, and based on context clues and also having played Nier before, I'm like, okay, so the replica is essentially like an android or cyborg or clone or some kind of artificial person, and the gestalt is some kind of original person, most likely. And so we're likely some kind of pair. For a while, I thought we were going to be literally the same person. Like, I was created I was expecting that I was going to be created from the gestalt, but we didn't seem to be related characters specifically. But we were a pair that was on some kind of mission on a ship. The ship had crashed, and the the pilot who was the Gestalt had already left at the time that we woke up. And then it teleports us, not teleports, but like we skip ahead to us being in a bathroom, and we're in just some facility where there seems to be no one manning anything, and we're looking for the Gestalt character. And as you proceed forward, you find other characters that seem similar but are not that character, and everyone else is a Silent Hill monster. Everyone's out to kill you, and everything's dark and empty and sad, and you're Resident Eviling through hallways and doing the key card game and everything. For a long time, it seems like a Yorha situation where everybody's female except for like 2 people. And that pretty much stays true, but you do meet this guy named Adler who seems to be an authority figure in the setting while also clearly setting himself immediately up as some kind of antagonist. He pushes you down an elevator shaft, and he tends to talk about things repeating. And when you wake up at the bottom of the elevator shaft, I think after a vision or something, I think there was an interstitial sequence. You wake up in what seems to be an entire pile of bodies that basically look identical to yours, which is a moment of questioning, like, okay, like in that moment, this is dumb, but I thought about jokes about Mario, and like when you're like, what if every single life, what if every attempt of Mario is canon, and all those pits are full of Mario corpses, like in Super Meat Boy replays and stuff. So I was like, have I been repeating this same day over and over again, waking up in the bathroom, trying again, getting pushed in this elevator shaft and killed, and then like in like Doctor Who Heaven Sent Hell Bent territory, have I fucking like reset this day so many times that my corpses have finally cushioned my fall and I've survived and can continue to the next level? Or is he just pushing everyone down this elevator shaft, and just characters look very similar, especially when they're a sprite in this game? Like, I had trouble telling characters apart when you have portraits, in part because you almost never see them next to each other, so you just get files of similar looking anime women separated by minutes, by minutes of context. But when they're extrapolated that far away to little sprites, I'm like, I literally can't even see their faces, so they could all be me or they could not be, because everyone wears the same clothes here and so on. Yeah. But this whole mission, we're looking for someone. And we meet someone else named Iso, who is also looking for someone, but someone else presumably. And so there's it's like the joining detail with both of them. Like there's this desire to find someone in this setting, while the setting itself is becoming increasingly abstract, where you're wondering whether or not we're even in a literal space, or like there's the question of like, this could be like to bring up Silent Hill too much all the time. Like is this some kind of weird metaphorical hell place? Is this a simulation? Is this some kind of other thing? And because we've introduced the idea of, especially me being a replica, thinking about Blade Runner and so on, and what is dealt with somewhat messily in the first movie and introduced more and more over the course of the revisions and director's cuts and final cuts and so on, but then like is explicitly the main text in the sequel. Are my memories mine? Like, is this a person, the person I'm pursuing, is it somebody I've ever met, or is it somebody that is introduced as like a memory to center myself and is like a driving factor that gives me purpose, like to keep me from going hollow, basically. And is maybe someone I've never met before, which is a thing that is then, after I already thought that, introduced by the text. So it means that they wanted me to think that, because when they talk about all the different versions of the replicas, they specifically talk about what type of person they were originally based on, what kind of background that person had, and what kind of like memories that they have that are fake that would center them, and what kind of behaviors and rituals would like stop them from like Cortana like emotionally destabilizing over time and becoming unstable and having to be replaced and so on. So like that's genuinely a worry in the text, is am I in this place? One, am I repeating the same thing over and over, the same day over and over again? And also, have I ever met the person that I'm trying to find? Are any of the assumptions that are introduced about my character even real? and what purpose does this serve overall. And I think the in-between steps from here to there aren't super important. It's kind of just gameplay and exploration and world building, but also just the space gets less and less literal for a bit, where they specifically fuck with you by they take away the map, which is a core part of how you play a Resident Evil type game, is that you have this map and it labels doors that you've checked and so on. They have a zone where they take away the map, and every time you go through any side of the screen door transition, you come out of the wrong side of the next screen for every single part.
So smart. So this is actually something I want to interject in and just talk about really briefly. There's a concept in filmmaking and in game design called the line of action, where in general, it happens in animation as well. When you do like a camera cut or camera continuity, you want the line of action to remain the same or similar enough that the viewer and the audience is not disoriented when you get to the next cut. And because of this, we get very used to, okay, I walked through the right side of a screen, I'm going to appear on the left side of the next screen, as if I am progressing through the rooms in a linear fashion. Think about like a 2D Zelda game, right? Like you're in a dungeon, it has two doors, one on the left and one on the right. You go through one of those doors, you end up on the correct physical side of the next room that you think you would be in.
To the point where I think some Zeldas and Mega Mans and so on literally have the slow motion screen transition where the game freezes and drags across to show you the continuity. And this one just breaks it for this entire level.
Exactly. And it's just in this one section. So there are multiple chapters in Signalis, and this second chapter takes place in an area that only shows up on the save screen as nowhere. If you have watched Keith's playthrough, this is the meat hell, the maze beneath, full of organic holes to slither into.
Writhing, throbbing flesh tunnels.
Yep. The wriggling holes. And as you exit the right side of a screen, you might appear on the top of the next room or the bottom of the next room. There is no visual continuity. And because you don't have a map, you can no longer think of the game as like, okay, I go to the right and then I move straight through and then I go up and like I'm in the next room. It's just like I go to the right and then I'm somewhere and then I go to the left and I'm somewhere again, and I just need to figure out where I am. And it makes you approach this area and like your physicality in that space entirely differently. And it's so fascinating. And then when you get back to the next chapter, which we'll talk about the mechanics of that probably a little bit later, the game resets and you no longer have this issue. And in a weird way, you feel so empowered by the fact that you have a map again. You're like, oh my God, like I know where I'm going now. Barring one maybe confusing moment that both Keith and I ran into in our playthroughs. I don't remember if I mentioned this to you, Keith. Keith messaged me when he got to this one section, was like, I have nowhere to go. I think I'm hard locked. And all I responded with, you're not hard locked.
Do you get stuck in the exact same spot?
Yep. I had no idea where to go. I did the same exact thing you did.
I was so worried.
But
because I was like, there's one yellow door left on the entire map, and every passage to that became blocked. And I'm like, what?
Yep.
What do we do?
Yeah, it was super confusing for me and my other buddy who I played the game with as well. But anyway, let's get back to summarizing the story. So you get to nowhere.
It's a relatively simple environment. It's not massively confusing, partly because they do a really good thing that a lot of games need to do, which is they have recognizable iconography everywhere, and so you just have like patterns that you start picking up on how these places fit together. Like, here's where the ladders are, here's where the throbbing flesh tunnel is that you dive into to do a boss fight. The most Silent Hill of all the boss fights in this game, specifically. Like, that one is a Silent Hill boss. It's akin to like the fucking Flesh Walls Cage Man, or there's like 6 bosses I could think about from the different games.
The abstract daddy. It looks a lot like the abstract daddy and the cage hanging from the ceiling in Silent Hill 2. This game is chock full of Silent Hill 2 references specifically. I mean, you mentioned you start the game in front of a mirror.
Right.
Elster has her hand like this going down her face, and then the immediate next text is, "I need to find her." Which is like exactly what James says. He's like, "I'm looking for my wife. She must be here," right?
I really should have thought about that more, because we met in that bathroom.
We did. The first time Keith and I ever met was I took him to the Silent Hill 2 world in VR chat, and you spawn looking at that mirror in the bathroom. That's very funny.
I should have thought about that, actually. It's like puts it specifically in my memory. But I have less memory cache, whatever, assigned to some of these nostalgic things. Like, there's certain legendary video games that people have obsessed over forever, and I've played them once recently, so I have way less committed memory to some of these things,
for sure.
But the I gotta turn this thing off. It's distracting me. There we go. I was getting messaged by someone too much.
Oh no.
Yeah, but they started doing a thing where this happened in the last zone in particular, where there was it was the most exhausting zone for me in the game, where it just was this giant sprawling 4-story level with lots of they tended to have a horseshoe shaped floor on every floor, but the top left corner was the ladder that unified all the floors, and there wasn't that much easy access, especially if you're trying to get back to one of the save points to change out your inventory. So that level wore me out a bit because of how much how much square mileage you had to cover, while specifically it's not that clearing out the opening the doors and doing your objectives was the exhausting thing. It's just that the fact that every time you got anywhere, your inventory filled again, and there's some games like Fallout where you're gonna be like, okay, all these things don't matter to me, just those items that matter to me. But I can't imagine the player of a Resident Evil or Silent Hill or any survival horror game that isn't grabbing every item just in case and mashing them all into their box, because why wouldn't you? So I had to do so many fucking trips because this level had so many fucking items in it. I'm out of order here. I'm talking about the previous level here. But that level was so complicated, it desperately did need the map. And so they make you rely on the map so hard for a couple of hours there. And then they put you in a level that has zero map whatsoever, but it has way more recognizable imagery, which is very helpful, because the previous one specifically was the same floor almost repeating 4 times. Like, it didn't have the same rooms, but it had the same layout template because it was one building, and that's how buildings generally work. And you mix it up with damage and obstructions and enemies and some varieties where actually this one's a big observation room or something, or this is a surgery room looking thing, but but it has to kind of be shaped the same way for continuity. This next building, though, is just, not only is it have no connection of being any kind of conjoined building thing. Those are horrible. Those are just absolutely incorrect words. But it doesn't have the structural limitations of being a building with multiple floors. It's just a bunch of weird rooms connected to silly string. I don't even know if you did take all the individual rooms and line them up how they have to line up, and just have to ignore the camera rotations and fix that mentally. I don't know if you can reconstruct this space into a physical place, or if it's like Dark Souls 2, everything's just kind of floating over each other. Who cares? It's connected by essentially visual novel route lines. But in this place, you fight, you fall down, you slide down the throat and fight the Silent Hill monster, and you find Isa, who, amusingly, as a little co-op setup, she's in the boss fight with you, and you distract the boss from killing her, and she's in the corner just trying to load this rifle thing, which has been heavily foreshadowed because they keep giving you blue ammo, and she's holding a blue rifle, and it's like effective mechanical foreshadowing for a weapon you're gonna get, and it taunts you. And then like the boss fight ends unexpectedly with her firing the gun finally and taking out the boss, but knocking herself out because she loaded some crazy anti-armor thing, and she specifically is like the housewife model or whatever that is specifically not equipped for doing this kind of thing. That's like in the text basically, if I remember correctly. And there's some interesting thing going on there too, where like whether you care about the story of that character or not, which I don't know who the people are that don't, but they exist, like people that just like, ew, the text. She has the blue rifle with her, so you have this like mechanical incentive to wake her up because you want the rifle. Because this game has set up this rifle for so long that they've been giving you this like anti-armor blue shots or whatever periodically, and then they've even taunted you in the text with being like, yeah, the ultimate configuration of this model is when she's in her iconic blue form or whatever. It actually uses the word iconic to describe some kind of like future Samus Aran transformation you're gonna have where you get the better armor. And you do eventually get the armor at a point, but like the fact that there's a blue gun, it's like so heavily pushes you to try to figure out how to get this rifle from her. But she's still searching for someone. Everyone's getting increasingly fucked up. She has stabbed Adler in the eye. I think her eye might be wounded at this point, and then there is even a point later in the narrative where you take an eye wound. So that's consistently reinforced as a theme, even I don't know exactly what it's going for there. But as you escape this less literal zone, and you get outside. And you have specific expectations of what to see outside because you saw the crash ship. It was snowing outside. There's a very specific thing that the world should be. But when you get out there, it's just fucking red. And it's like not even like tinged red. It's just the color red, like straight Fs or whatever the fuck the hex code is, all the way across, pure red, no shading, no lighting, no texture, just the flat red. So you're just on it's like a stage play almost, where you're on the staircase with Adler. I think Adler was there. You were there multiple times, so I'm trying to think specifically. And the entire backdrop is just this flat red, and you just walk into the red void. Your character's just
I love the visuals.
You're just in nowhere completely. And you do arrive at the ship, which is just embedded in the red. And you what is it? She tries to open the hatch to get inside, and her arm snaps off, and she just falls.
It's rotoscoped. The arm snapping off animation is from Ghost in the Shell. It's the final moment where Motoko is trying to pull the Puppet Master's tank open, and she like rips her arm off and like explodes. It's rotoscoped from that, so even more direct homage.
The what is it? Lost my train of thought for a second there. I'm very good at this. But I guess I think you basically just are suggested to die. I'm trying to remember if do you get inside in that ending? Or do you just fall down and that's it at that point?
You fall down, I believe you see Elster's body in the desert, and then it cuts to the fake out ending, the title screen.
Yeah.
Which I'm so proud of you for not falling for.
Well, the game so heavily sets up the replica and Gestalt stuff that I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of Nier already. And as it goes on, there's enough Nier and Nier Automata type stuff that I'm like, okay, this is on purpose. I'm supposed to be thinking of Nier. I have not often played the majority of the references that a thing is making. Like I think about like when I played Lone Survivor, I hadn't experienced a single piece of media it was referencing, so it was just a game of things that happened in it. Like none of it was callbacks to things for me. But yeah, your arm snaps off, you fall down and just kind of lay in the red and die seemingly. It kicks you out to the title screen as if that's an ending. But if you hit continue, it just loads back up and continues forward. at the beginning of the game, and I think here it's repeatedly reinforced. There's a phrase, remember your promise, or I think is the exact phrasing.
Remember our promise.
Our promise. Where there's which is I'm the type of person that forgets this stuff the first time it comes up because there's no context for it. So I'm just like, oh, cool. Yeah, stuff's being shouted at me. And like enough different things are being shouted at me at the beginning of the game that which ones are specifically the ones that are going to be motifs is less than obvious. Because, I mean, sure, remember our promise comes up a lot, but so does this space left intentionally blank. So maybe that's the theme.
This space left intentionally blank comes from Monogatari. That's a thing from an anime that it's referencing,
Is that from
which
an anime?
itself is crazy. Yeah, the cutscenes are directed in a way that looks exactly like the Monogatari series. So if you've ever seen Bakemonogatari, Kizumonogatari, any of those, it has the red cut frames. It has the black frames that say like this space left intentionally blank. It has text on the screen that flashes way too quickly to read. But all of that stuff often hides even deeper, cooler meaning in it too. So I'll talk a little bit about that when we finish your summary and when I go through with the corrections. But
yeah, this is definitely the thing that I have not seen. I don't know anything about Monogatari. I have seen a random sampling of Ghost in the Shell standalone complex because it was the TV days where you just saw chunks of anime in random order, and I've never watched it from front to back as a thing I could intentionally watch. And I have watched the Ghost in the Shell movie, which is a lot of choir and slow scrolling shots,
which Signalis is also full of.
But the God, I gotta get my head back on.
Chapter 3.
Things are getting corrupted at this point. At this point, you actually do loop. You wake up back in the bathroom, and things are significantly worse. I think the bathroom was swarming with insects that I assumed were flies at the time because that's what you associate with. As a Westerner, you associate rot with flies and maggots and so on. So you see a swarm, you're like, these are stinging insects or pest insects or whatever. But I potentially should have guessed for an Eastern game for it to be butterflies. But eventually you find a room where there are preserved butterflies on the wall, and the room's full of insects again. You're like, oh, those were so that was a room full of butterflies, but also the walls are all covered in like rotting flesh. And at this point, entire doorways are just like bulging outward with throbbing meat that blocks your passage. The blank receptionist area that was once there is now completely encased in meat. Entire areas of the game are no longer accessible. And you replay like a corrupted version of the game that's significantly shorter. Let's see. I guess the basalt column mines were much. That was before Nowhere.
Yes, that's underneath. So the game starts on a planet, or it's technically a moon, of a planet called Lung, and it takes place in a mining facility called Sherpinsky P23, I think, or S23. It's S23, Sherpinsky 23. And this level that Keith was talking about, that's basically like you start on the top and then 4 levels down, they're basically all the same layout. You're going from the administrative entrance area of a mine to the mine shaft itself underneath on this foreign moon.
Let's see. It reinforces the constant 6 because there's you can only have 6 items in your inventory, and the number 6 comes up periodically throughout the game. And specifically, when you get into the mine, finally, the entire thing is hexagonal columns, which is one of the only things that was spoiled for me preemptively, was just the fact that people like, hey, look, guys, basalt columns. Because I have this gallery for that stuff, and so people would send me, whenever they see basalt columns, they send me an example. And so I knew that there was this mine of that, but I kind of forgot until I found it again.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think there's also 6 planets. I could be wrong, but there's like 6 major planets in this galactic civilization.
I imagine almost everything is like 6 things. There's probably 6 named characters. Let's see.
Are there 6?
Elster.
I think there's 6 main
Ariane,
units.
Issa, Adler, Falk. There's 5 characters.
There's another one. There's Ariane and Alina.
Is that who Ariane's looking for?
That's who Elster is looking for in Sherpinski. It's who the brown-haired girl that the photo changes to. We'll talk about this in a minute. I'll clarify all of this.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to anyone listening.
No, I think I was struggling to keep the characters straight because you don't see them that much, obviously.
Yep.
And I'm not great with names to begin with. But I was like, I don't remember looking for a white-haired girl until suddenly that was what we were looking for. And that seemed like it was changing. That potential, but then there's a question of, are those different characters the same character? Because that's a struggle as you go through.
We will talk about that. That is, I think, I want to preface to everyone listening, this confusion is not, it's weird because I think in a lot of series you would be confused by this and it would feel arbitrary. But this game very specifically wants these lines to blur. It wants you to be asking these weird questions, and it is very much directly about this very thing we are talking about. So, but yes, you make it to this 3rd chapter, Gestalter Fall, and then you end up on Rotfront, which is not actually Sherpinski. It is a different planet. Yeah.
So like the it's funny because there's a few moments where it was mentioned a few times enough that I was like, wait, am I on Rotfront? No, I'm not on Rotfront. And then I was on a Rotfront after I clarified that I wasn't on a Rotfront.
Yes.
Because you start off on it's not a space station, it's on a moon, I guess, but it feels like a space station because it's this like isolated thing you can't like leave and so on, and it's all in one place. But then you're in the nowhere place that's Meat Nightmare Silent Hill stuff, and then you transition after the ending to a new planet that is very clearly like a Eastern apartment building sort of setup.
Yes.
Like particularly, and I'm not trying to speak in like Orientalist terms or anything like that when I'm like do this, but I'm just like, I specifically have less than specific details about these things. Like I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about with this stuff, but I do know that I've played like I think it was a Korean horror game a few years ago that had
Are you thinking about Devotion?
I'm also thinking about Devotion, but first I think I played a Korean horror game a couple years sooner than that. Then I played Detention and Devotion, and Devotion gets you familiar with these indoor environments that are like concrete walls, and then these like heavy like armored gated looking apartment doors that are red and have these like kind of like vertical bars look to them. That's not like the windows bars we're used to having in like cities in the United States, where it's like the almost like cartoon prison bars or a diamond cage, but instead like this like very specific like vertical bars, but not necessarily with openings in them, red patterned door that was just very familiar. I'm like, okay, I know just enough to know that this is noticeably different from the moon base that I was on before, and it very specifically seems to be like an apartment complex from a different country. And so we seem to have transitioned to a living area, but then specifically at that point, like it also gets like temporally a little confusing, and it seems to be suggesting that you're specifically rewinding back to the childhood home of characters in the story, and that's when the notes that you're finding everywhere, like which were previously about like the notes you're finding everywhere were previously a few survivor notes about like what's textually happening in the actual narrative, but a lot of it was here's explanations of the different models and how they work, and then the second layer of like, and here's the dark secret that only the commander gets to know about all these models, and how they actually work and how they interact with each other and how to manipulate them or how to keep them stable, like getting into the programming of their minds and all that. But in this place, you're more dealing with like she didn't, this lady didn't, she grew up in some sort of like backwards farming community, and her parents traded in illegal texts and other subversive things, and man, I sure hope military training bashes all of her creative thinking out, because she likes art or some loser shit. She's trying to paint when she needs to be a cog. Basically that kind of setup, like just the most sneering, nasty little letters from teachers that think that hate that this person has any drive or personality to themselves. And over the course of this area, we get this glimpse of this like disaffected character that wants out of this society, and so she volunteers or signs up for this like deep space mission where she's going to be in this ship for literal years, maybe significantly longer, because you're talking about cycles that are hard to. I actually don't even know if it was like, if I might have misinterpreted something, and it might have even been like hundreds of years or thousands of years or some bullshit like that. But like long, lonely ship where she was looking forward to being alone with just a dumb service droid that she wasn't supposed to interact with, and just being alone finally. But instead, she gets so lonely that she gets actually like very involved in trying to build a relationship with the replica that she wasn't supposed to interact with, and kind of breaking all the rules of bonding with this character that I think the notes very specifically say for that model that you're not supposed to actually interact with them really at all.
Don't show it movies. Don't show it kindness. Don't let it consume art. It will destabilize this combat unit.
Yep. And so instead she spent a very, very long time destabilizing this combat unit.
Yeah.
And which
don't kiss the robot, it says before she kisses the robot.
Which I think loops directly back to like the beginning of the game where we crash, she's gone, we're looking for her, and clearly obsessed with her, and that's the only driving factor, and we don't know where she's gone and so on. There's a specific thing I skipped over, which is that in the big four, I think it was the big 4-floor convoluted part of the area, much earlier in the game, you do find the quarters of the commander of the entire base, Sierpinski, Falk, who is this who was this very tall, like there's taller models. They just have super legs and otherwise are the same shape as other characters, and she's the leader of this entire organization, this military group of this outpost, and she's the one that actually is. She's the only one that's supposed to have all that secret information about stabilizing and so on, like the secret notes about everybody. All of them say, for Commander's eyes only, destroy after reading, which she clearly wasn't doing. But she apparently went outside at some point, came back sick, spread the sickness to everybody else in the facility, and then seemingly killed herself. So you just find her laying in her bed, dead. And this is noteworthy because when you're doing the second run through of the zone, she's the final boss, and she says that she's you, and you fight her, and then after this, the benefit of playing a game more than once is being able to get these details ironed out better, especially since I'm sure a lot of these details are helpful. When you replay, you're like, oh shit, that's what's going on, based on stuff I saw. You end up going outside again after you Adler tries to stop you. He's all rotten faced at this point and completely decayed down to just being like I don't even know what to call it exactly. It
bio-organic components, basically.
He's like a noseless, fleshy skull man that looks extremely familiar in a way where I can't immediately recall what I'm thinking of, but I feel like I've seen almost that same character before. He at this point stabs you in the eye, which is what Iso did to him previously. Iso is also dead because Iso came to the conclusion, I think, that she'll never find the woman she's looking for there, and then she just like dissolves into gore in front of you, just disintegrates into a puddle, or like it looks like she clips through the floor kind of, but I think that's supposed to be her dissolving into the puddle forming there, because that's like the minimal graphics basically. Like I think the chain of I'm trying to think of the chain here. I'm trying to remember if Iso had a stabbed eye or not specifically, but I think
she has a bandage on her, like all over her face. She like gets progressively more wounded as the game goes on, but you only ever see it off screen, so you have no idea how she sustained her injuries.
There's a continuity that slightly reminds me of like Annihilation's tattoo spreading from person to person, where like you start realizing that Adler's the bad guy much earlier in the game, but instead of confronting him, you see a cutscene where Iso is confronted by him, and she stabs him in the eye with a knife, and he falls down a mine shaft and is not seen for a while. Then when you see Iso at the end of the game, she has a bandage over her eye. I think it's when she has the creepy rotoscoped jiggly hand in front of the mirror and stuff. I think that might be that scene, which is uncanny to watch. And then she dissolves into gore. And then at the end of the game, Adler is old gore mostly, and as you make it clear that you're going to try to leave again, he stabs you in the eye. There's like a chain here specifically. And then you go out into the void again. I think it was snow this time in the ending. I'm trying to remember. So. You get to the ship again, and so you once again replay like the tutorial area. But this time when you get to the final chamber, there's a woman with white hair laying in the pod that was empty at the beginning of the game. And at least in my ending, I think I said that I couldn't keep our promise, and then and she doesn't remember who I am or what's happening, and then I just lay there kind of bleeding out, just saying like, just let me stay with you for a while longer, and then the game ends.
So it's very funny. It's very fun to hear your story of the game. So just quickly before we get into the actual narrative, there are 4 endings to Signalis 4. And the way that you get them is very similar to the way that you get the endings in Silent Hill 2. It depends on how you're playing. It depends on what you do. And it's not like you get this item and, give it to this character and you get the secret ending. Like, that's not how it works. The first 3 endings are achieved just by having different stats. So it's like you killed a lot of enemies. You, dealt a ton of damage and took a ton of damage and spent a really long time in game. You get this ending. You play really balanced. You get another ending. So
I had the right suspicion for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Where I was like, I think I might be getting in trouble for killing all these people. I might get a bad ending.
Sort of. And so that's one thing. This game does not have a specific canon ending. In fact, and I'll talk about this in a bit, all of the endings can, and I think there is a very hard textual argument for this, do coexist. All of the endings happen. And this includes the secret ending, which is called Artifact. And the process of getting this is insane. It requires you to tune in to secret radio stations, number stations throughout the game that seemingly have no purpose, and then find secret items that only appear when you are tuned to those stations. And then it gives you keys that allow you to open a otherwise locked safe at the very last moment of the game by keying in the 36-digit number station code that you hear repeated throughout the game. And then it gives you this very quick, very abrupt, very strange, esoteric secret ending.
Right. I forgot to mention that place, but that's like, speaking of like potential Silent Hill references, is the fact that this game periodically has bits where you suddenly are in first person, which is very Silent Hill 4, but specifically the most Silent Hill 4 thing is that there's a specific small living space room that you only visit through a hole in the wall, and then whenever you turn around to look at the impossible hole you came through, it's gone. Yep. And that room has the banned texts, a turned off computer, a radio that's powered, and the corner has a safe with 5 locks on it, and there's a copy of The King in Yellow, which is the only way to leave that room each time is to pick up that book.
Kiniro no O. And it's interesting. These first person segments are also unique because at least the first one that you encounter, you like pick up an item in it. And then when you are booted out of the first person sequence and you're back on Sierpinski, you have that item. Which is very interesting because they're often framed as memories or video footage, and it's very unclear who or how you're actually experiencing these events. So, so that was Keith's interpretation of the story. I will now try to quickly summarize the events we see in the game with the corrections, and then kind of flip that and chronologically go over what happens. So the game opens with a sort of prologue sequence where you are on a scout shuttle known as the Penrose 512. It crashes on an unknown snowy planet. You are an LSTR, an Elster unit that is a replica, an android in the society. And you have a photo of a silver-haired girl. And all Elster is thinking is, I must find this woman. You venture out off the ship after opening the cryo chamber and finding that she is not in there, and you end up going into this blizzard. And you see this strange arch formation, and it kind of looks like a like one column of Stonehenge. You pass through it, and you end up at this big hole in the ground that looks like sort of another Annihilation reference, the Tower, which Keith won't understand because he hasn't read the book. But in the book Annihilation, a column going down into the earth is a very prominent feature. You go into this kind of hollowed out silo, and there's a hole in the wall. You wander through the hole in the wall. You end up in this strange, warm room. As Keith mentioned, there's a radio, a safe. It only has 3 locks on it, but it also has a weird symbol on it. You can't open it. There's a copy of The King in Yellow, a bunch of banned texts, a bunch of propaganda on the walls, a computer terminal that's turned off, a door that your character is uncomfortable and won't go through. You pick up The King in Yellow, and you have a very strange kind of cutscene hallucination where like your character's face melts, and it quotes H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival, and it just says, "Great holes secretly are digged where Earth's pores are ought to suffice, and things have learnt to walk that ought to crawl." While this is happening, a numbers station is reading, just reading off its numbers, and it the vision ends with this memory of the Elster unit and the silver-haired woman Ariane, asking Elster, "Remember our promise, wake up." Suddenly, Elster, the player character, wakes up in the bathroom of the first floor of Sierpinski 23, which is a mining facility whose actual purpose has been redacted from all documents. However, if you look at the actual text in the game, the way they redact it is actually just a font. So you can decode all of the redactions in the game. Sierpinski 23. Sierpinski 23 is a re-education facility for political dissidents. You look in your inventory, and your Elster unit is looking for someone, just like the Elster unit that we saw in the prologue. However, the photo you are looking at has changed. It is no longer a white-haired woman. It is a brown-haired woman that looks a lot like her, but not exactly like her, named Alina Seo. As you go through this facility, you find out that some sort of biomechanical sickness has been taking over the crew. Their organic components are rapidly decaying and forming these cancerous growths that affects their programming. And over time, as you go through this facility, you meet a few people, and you find out that essentially this facility is being taken over by a sickness. The commander, Adler, the commanding unit currently in charge, who is supposed to be seeing over this facility, has basically lost his mind journaling because the actual high-powered military officer, the Falk unit, has seemingly shut herself down after, as Keith said, wandering out of the facility through a strange archstone and coming back sick. Every unit in the facility is gotten sick, and things have gone to shit. Meanwhile, Elster finds a human, a gestalt named Isolde Isa Ito. Isolde is looking for her sister, Erica. As you go through Sierpinski, you encounter kind of flashbacks to someone's past. You're walking, you see a silver-haired woman on a train on a snowy planet. This planet is known as Rotfront. You experience a flashback to a mountainous broadcast station filled with banned texts. And you find a letter addressed to someone's mother saying, hey, you know, you've done a really good job. You've contributed to the nation. You are basically a spy doing broadcast stuff. You're operating a numbers station, but your daughter has been afforded a life that is not good for the nation. So it's very easy to immediately understand that the daughter in question is Ariane Young, the silver-haired girl. And so with enough probing from Ariane's aunt, Ariane is moved from the isolated number station where she was grown reading banned texts and painting with her mother to the center of this authoritarian government's control, Rotfront, where she goes to a, military school. And at that school, she is bullied fiercely. This is the same school that Erica Ito and Isolde Ito go to. But it seems like, for the most part, no one really reaches out to Ariane. No one helps her. She is just bullied by her classmates for not fitting in because she's the weird, isolated, creative girl who grew up with her mother in the mountains after being born on a far-off planet. It is revealed eventually that Ariane was born on Lung, which is the planet that Sierpinski is on a moon of. Essentially, or Lung might be the moon that Sierpinski's on, something like that. I can't remember the exact specifics. So you see these flashbacks of Ariane's life, and it's just very clear she's not happy on Rotfront. As Elster navigates Sierpinski, putting together all of these pieces, she eventually discovers Adler, who at first seems very friendly, but then pushes her down an elevator shaft into the bottom of the facility, where it is revealed, as Keith said, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Elster corpses. And it is in these lower levels that you begin to learn more of what is actually happening. So in this world, there is a war going on between an empire and a people's republic. The empire controls 2 core planets. And after a sort of gigantic fight on a planet known as Veneta, the use of replicants in war, or replicas, I should say, in war has drastically increased. Replicas are making up more of society. They're filling more roles as the Gestalt population is slowly decreasing. At the same time, there is something known as bioresonance that is being cultivated in both people and in replicas. This is a sort of ESP. It's like telepathy and telekinesis, this extreme power to kind of talk about where it comes from. This is a homage to new types in Gundam. And it's this next level of human evolution, replica evolution, that gives people the ability to not only control others, but do all sorts of things, even potentially bend reality. And it becomes clearer and clearer as you're going on. You find these notes from the commanding unit, the Adler, that say, am I experiencing the same day over and over again? I keep seeing these people. They keep doing these things. there seems to be some sort of confusion happening here. And this is just my interpretation because the story is very ambiguous, but the way I read this is some sort of bioresonance is causing memories to bleed between people and units. So, for all we know, all of the Elster units we have seen and played as in the game are, in fact, different people. They are different replicas that all, for some reason, have this memory of being separated from someone that they're looking for. And you see this paralleled in the text. You find notes from Alina Seo, the brown-haired woman, saying, "Oh, I became friends with an Elster unit." And in your head, you think they are talking about you. But in reality, she's talking about just whatever Elster unit was at this Sierpinski facility while she was there for re-education. And you begin to see these themes start to cycle, right? And it's unclear if they're literally living through a time loop or if the fact that they're all experiencing and bleeding these memories and all doing the same things and barely inching further and further closer to this unseen goal is just making people believe that they're in a time loop because they're just seeing the same thing happen repeatedly. As you descend into the mines, you find out that more and more units are getting corrupted, presumably getting the same sickness that the Falk unit had when she left Sierpinski and came back. Presumably spreading it to them through her bioresonance. So the thing with the Falk unit is that it is sort of the shining achievement replica of this People's Republic. It is profoundly bioresonant. It is said to be the modeled after the daughter of the Great Revolutionary. It has 3 stars on its head, which is a symbol that you see throughout the game on bioresonant units. And in fact, those 3 stars are on the cover of the King in Yellow. You dive into the mines, end up finding a big hole in the ground, and then Isolde is there. She sneaks up on Adler, pushes him down a hole. You jump down the hole, and you end up in nowhere. Nowhere is in the mines of Lung. It is this strange, esoteric, presumably cult compound. You find references to a Grand Empress, who you later learn from banned texts is a deity of some kind, some sort of cosmic entity that is worshipped by some people. It's said that potentially the people, the Great Revolutionary and the People's Republic was gifted the power of bioresonance by this creature, this deity known as the Grand Empress or the Great Empress or something. And that is kind of what unlocked the ability to do this replica technology. As things progress and things get crazier and crazier, you make it out of nowhere. You save Isolde from this like rotted, cancered creature in nowhere. And, as Keith said, you wander out of the mines eventually and end up on this strange sequence in this desert where everything is red. And, you find the wreckage of Penrose and you try to open it and you die in the desert. This takes place on the desert planet of Kotej, which is one of the many planets, which is not the planet that Sierpinski is on, and it is not the snowy planet that the game starts on. So presumably, we have once again jumped to another Elster unit. And we're seeing that there are many colony ships. There are many of these Penrose ships that have crashed in different places. You have this weird dream where that details Elster and Ariane's journey. You find out that Elster has been kind of in close connection with Ariane, that Ariane has been ignoring the directives for the mission because, as Keith said, she was a bullied girl. She didn't like society here. She specifically joined this mission because she saw a photo of a woman from the Veneta warfront. And it inspired her. It made her think, if I look so much like this woman, why couldn't I live this life? Like, why can't I be a contributing member of society? Why can't I be what I want and like be accepted for who I am and find happiness? So she goes on this colony ship, enlists to get away from everyone and to like do good for the nation in her own way. And we pick back up as a different Elster unit on Rotfront, which is that horrible, snowy, authoritarian planet. And we're in a very weirdly similar to the mining re-education camp apartment building. But this apartment building has been completely taken over by this weird cancerous growth. As we go through, we find out that Rotfront is where Erica and Isolde grew up. It's where Ariane lived with her aunt and where she went to school and was bullied. And we find the photo that inspired Ariane to enlist. And it is a photo of, I can't remember her name, Lilith Ito, Erica and Isolde's mother. And it's a picture of of Lilith Ito and Alina Seo. And it's clear that Alina is the person that inspired Ariane to enlist. But the cool thing about this, the weird thing, is that Lilith Ito, Erica and Isolde's mother, is the war veteran from Veneta that the Elster unit is a replica of. So Lilith is the gestalt of the Elster unit replicas. And so suddenly you begin to see this blending of things, and things begin to get very weird. Throughout the game, the Elster units are having hallucinations of a painting. The painting being Der Toteninsel, which is the Isle of Death by Arnold Böcklin. And you also, there are various environments in the game that are also taken from, I can't remember
I was trying to remember where it was from because I was like, I swear I've seen this painting before. I swear I've seen it.
The Shore of Oblivion. That's the other one. The Shore of Oblivion by, what the fuck is his name? Eugen Bracht. And the interesting thing about these paintings, just to get back to the themes a little bit, is that these are paintings that were painted multiple times by their original artists and have been painted multiple times throughout history by other people. So again,
which they then specifically riff on, because during the first like fake ending, when you're trying to break open the hatch, your entire silhouette is replaced by rapidly switching through these paintings.
Yes, exactly. And it's all the different variants of these paintings, which again, where we have been the whole game, various different iterations of the Elster unit, seeing various differentiations and variations of these days that the Adver unit has been seemingly reliving as his memories blend with other people's, other commanding officers experiencing these same events. And it seems very clear that this is driven by some sort of bioresonance. As the game cuts to this new sequence, you make it through the apartment building in Rotfront and find out that Isolde is in her parents' apartment. She finds pictures of herself and of Erica, and they are in a family shrine. Erica and Isolde have been dead for a very, very long time. And so she fades away, knowing that she cannot find the person she was looking for. And it's unclear if she was ever literally there or if some memory of her journey or journeys of people like her have been bleeding through and causing us to perceive people as her, or causing us to hallucinate that she was there the whole time. As I mentioned, her injuries mirror Elster's injuries, which in turn mirror Adler's injuries. And it's very, very kind of confusing, but it seems like there's some sort of link between the Ito family, going from Lilith to Erica and Issa to the Elster units, just as there is some sort of link between Ariane, Alina, and the Falk unit. And eventually, we make it back outside. And we find the crashed wreckage of the Penrose 512. This time we manage to go in, and we find that Ariane is there in the cryo chamber. We learn more about the actual purpose of her mission. She was on a scouting ship. The People's Republic quickly realized that there was a resource deficit in the world and that this war was going to destroy galactic civilization, basically. They essentially glassed Veneta, which is a huge water world, in order to just prevent the Empire from winning. The Empire holds these two nations of Haymat and I think Katej pretty strongly in the core of the universe. And the People's Republic is kind of stuck in this outer rim planets. And so instead of trying to fight for the center of the galaxy, they have been sending siege ships outward, very Knights of Sidonia, very Stomu Nihei style work like Blame. And it ends up being revealed that these missions are only stocked for about 4 years. And over those 4 years, after the 4th year, the radiation shielding on the engines of these siege ships will decay, and it will cause the scout commander, so Ariane, to develop cancer and die. And the whole reason why the Elster unit is there is to kill them so that they don't have to live with this horrible cancer if their mission is a failure, if they're not able to find a habitable planet in the time allotted to them. But obviously, Ariane did not listen to this this directive. She didn't read the notes. She didn't care about them. They were still sealed by the time we find them. And she completely destabilized her Elster unit, and the Elster unit was not able to do its mission. In fact, the things we learn about the Elster unit are we're not supposed to show it art, we're not supposed to show it kindness, we're not supposed to fraternize with it, because those are the things that created Lilith Ito's post-war identity with Alina Sio, and eventually resulted in Alina Sio being sent to re-education camp. And so as all of these events mix and commingle and people's memories bleeds together and identities fail, even the Falk unit says, I'm you, we're not going to be able to find her. It's because this link with Ariane and her incredible bioresonance has potentially made contact with this grand cosmic entity of some kind. There are mentions of something called the Red Eye, which is a storm, sort of like the Eye of Jupiter on Rotfront that you can see in the sky that some people have some sort of significance. They attribute some significance to. That seems to be some sort of cosmic event. Basically, the way that I interpreted the plot from here is that Ariane and Elster are in love on this seed ship. The radiation has given Ariane horrible cancer, but she can't push herself to die. She asks Elster to kill her. Elster can't do it. So Ariane is put into cryo. But while she is dying in cryo slowly over time, her bioresonance is broadcasting to everywhere. And her cancer and her superstitious beliefs about this Grand Empress, about this red eye in the sky, are slowly making this supernatural superstition real. It's spreading this cancer everywhere. It's causing all of these memories to bleed. And so you have all of these Elster units destabilizing inherently, seeking these people that they've lost. And over time, this memory bleed effect is affecting everyone. It's affecting the Falc units that are very, very bioresonant. It's affecting the people, the gestalts of the affected replicas. It's affecting the Calibri units that are inherently bioresonant on their own and have to operate in groups. And it's causing this cancer, this flesh that they found in the mines of Lung, which is where Ariane was born before she was moved to this broadcast station on Rod Front with her mother, to essentially become this like global cosmic outbreak. Finally, the ending happens, and you get whatever ending you, I guess, get determined by the game. In the leave ending, you leave the ship, you don't have the courage to see Ariane, and you wander through, I believe, the wastelands of Veneta. In the memory ending, you get the courage to go back to Ariane, but Ariane doesn't remember you, and you don't remember her, and you die there with her. You get the promise ending if you play really aggressively and do a lot of damage and take a lot of damage and spend a lot of time in the game. In that ending, you remember each other and you kill Ariane. And then you succumb to your wounds, fulfilling your promise. And then in the secret ending, and this is deep lore, a Elster unit is able to open this strange safe after using the number station, and she finds a lily, which again, lesbian overtones and themes, which she then takes to a strange site with 6 pillars on it, I believe, and 5 dead Elster units around them. She puts the lily on the pillar and dies, and then has a happy memory of Ariane and Elster kind of dancing on this colony ship forever.
Lily also has 6 petals.
Yes. And interestingly enough, the columns that she places them on mirror the war memorial on Veneta that we see a photo of Lilith Ito at. And so I know that this sounds insane, and I probably got a few details wrong because it's been a few months since I played it, but
it's a lot. It's a lot to get straight.
It is. It's a very insane sounding story, but I personally love it. I think it's incredible. And of course, this is not me saying this is, of course, the only things that could possibly happen. A lot of this is interpretation because a lot of it is hard to define, but there is a lot of hard text, things we know objectively did happen. The Sierpinski turning into a hell zone, there being mines underneath it, Ariane being bullied on Rot Front, like all of that, we can pretty much directly point to the text and say this happened. We saw it and have corroborating evidence. But for the most part, the game's left open to interpretation, and a lot of these details, like the cosmic
which is the point
entity,
too.
The bioresonance, none of this is very direct. But it does get to, I think, the thing that the game is saying. So I just want to line up a few things before we talk about the main theme of the game, which is all of these different points of odd synchronicity. So again, the game has all of these homages that it's building off of. It has the 6 inventory unit limit from, Resident Evil. It has the visual stylings of Ghost in the Shell, of Blade Runner, of the Monogatari series. It has the languages of Blade Runner, the fact that there are replicas in humans. It has the replica and the gestalt, just like Nier. It has the bathroom sequence and I'm looking for my wife from Silent Hill 2. It has Der Toten Incel and the Shore of Oblivion, paintings that have been repainted countless times through the ages.
These are all happening because canonically, the bioresonant anime girls played those video games and remembered them, and then they manifested in real life.
Hey, perhaps. And then, of course, there's Robert Chambers, The King in Yellow. And interestingly, and this is sort of an interesting connection that I don't think a lot of people realize, H.P. Lovecraft was very directly inspired by The King in Yellow. Hastur of the Lovecraft mythos is not an invention of Lovecraft. I believe he was actually an invention of August Derleth, or like he was connected to the larger mythos by August Derleth. But The King in Yellow, this Lovecraftian, proto-Lovecraftian tale, is actually a work that predates Lovecraft's primary works. And so you have this
I
King in
blew it
Yellow
immediately.
literary.
I blew it immediately in the series because I knew there was a connection. So I was like, "Oh, The King in Yellow, a Lovecraft story," and then I just moved on. Like,
No, it's by Robert Chambers.
Yeah, which put me in the right genre territory of like what the kind of
Yes.
point of it is. But I'd be missing the point that like the game is quoting Lovecraft but showing a book that's not by Lovecraft.
Yes.
I've
And
never
so
read.
you have these connections of art that is building off of other art, people that are building off of other people, planets that are seeded and colonized by other planets, wars that are long held grudges between people that came before. And in many ways, I think Signalis is about what it is like to live in a world where, you know, this sort of existentialist idea of if nothing is original, how can we make something new? And you very clearly in the story experience this existential fear of like, how do I express myself? How do I be myself? What does it even mean to be oneself if we are just the genetic ancestors of all of the people that came before us? What does it mean to be a story built off of other stories? What does it mean to pay homage to a legacy? Can you do that while also achieving something new? And ultimately, I think Signalis succeeds in this. So, kind of the statement that I opened a lot of my discussion already about was that it's very easy to say Signalis is Resident Evil by way of Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid and Blade Runner and Monogatari. But after playing Signalis and seeing all of these homages and influences and iterations fused together, it's extraordinarily hard to see Signalis as anything other than Signalis. And I think that's really what the game's actual plot and narrative is saying. It doesn't matter if your story has been told 1,000 times, there's still meaning in telling it. And there's still meaning in taking your influences and rearranging them. In fact, it's immensely and infinitely possible to make new things out of old things because the context of their meaning will change and be significantly meaningful to the people that that story is for. And in the case of Elster and Ariane, it doesn't matter what the universe wanted for them. It doesn't matter that Ariane was a creative woman being oppressed by a government that didn't want her to be this way. Because in the end, you know, that's a story that's as old as time, but it mattered to her and it mattered to that Elster unit. And in a way, sure, maybe they were just reliving the same experiences that Lilith Ito and Alina Seo experienced. And maybe Alina Seo is just one variation upon the many different originators of this story. The differences and the context is what mattered for them. And that's also paralleled in the cutscenes. There's this one really great moment in the Falca boss fight where you see the Elster unit that you're playing as, and behind her is a line of other Elster units, and she turns in the cutscene in this really cinematic way, and then all of them slowly turn in line, and then it cuts to the Falca unit, and behind her is Alina Seo, and behind her is Ariane Young, and behind her is, you know, a bunch of other people. I think Erica or Isolde Ito is behind one of the Elster units as well. You see them all turn, and it's again reiterating this idea that like people could possibly just, you can view them as variations of other people. They might all be doing the same thing or doing the same, all ultimately building off of the same journey, right? But what matters is the experience of each one of those individual people, because the story as you experience it may not actually be the story that's being told. But that doesn't mean that the way that you experience that narrative isn't meaningful to you. And so, yeah, that's Signalis. And I just think it's so profound that instead, I mean, to be incredibly reductive, it's a game that manages to take homage and reference and influence and build something beautiful out of it and not become Ready Player One.
Or Lone Survivor. And that axe to
or
grind
Lone
there.
Survivor. Yes. Well, it's
you were
funny.
So mad playing that game.
I was. So Lone Survivor was the game that I streamed immediately after Signalis, and it did not do Lone Survivor any favors. I don't want to shit on Lone Survivor. Jasper Byrne did a great job making a game that is probably immensely meaningful to him. It got an incredible soundtrack. Listen to the soundtrack, please. It's great. The art in it is wonderful. But an issue I had with Lone Survivor is that it uses reference as shorthand. There's like a room with a checkerboard floor or checkerboard wall tiles or something, and blue curtains that's very clearly meant to be the same thing as the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks, which is a reference that Keith will not understand. But you know, there's a man with a box on his head that's like a kind of weird, you know, guidance figure that like talks to you, and there's a quirky dancing guy that drinks coffee and, you know, speaks in riddles. There's a lot of stuff in that game that if you have not seen the references, it doesn't do a lot of heavy lifting to tell its story. It really needs those references for its meaning to be apparent, because it's using those references as code for what is actually happening in the narrative and what the game is trying to talk about. Signalis, on the other hand, I think is really interesting because I just talked all about its references and I talked all about the things that it is doing narratively, but you don't need to know what it's referencing to get something new out of Signalis and understand the story it's telling. Because at its core, Signalis is still a love story between a woman and her, you know, oppressed lover who fled society because she didn't fit in. And it's easy to tell. You don't need to know that Robert Chambers predates Lovecraft and that by quoting Lovecraft while referencing Robert Chambers, you're talking about iteration. You don't need to know that Der Toten Incel was painted 6 times by Bocklin to understand that you are seeing 6 different versions of this painting in quick succession in these cutscenes. And to say, hey, why are there so many variants of this? You don't need to understand the value or like the meaning of, you know, am I a replicant in Blade Runner to understand that the idea of a human and a cyborg built off of them as a template brings into question the meaning of identity. And I think there is a lot of significance and elegance in the way Signalis approaches its usage of homage and influence that service its themes and its narrative in a way that something like, unfortunately, I feel like Lone Survivor doesn't really do. So, or I mean, to make an even better comparison, like Ready Player One, you could remove the references in Ready Player One and it would still be the same story, and it would just be a bad story because it needs
It'd be
its
a better
references to
story
survive.
even because it wouldn't have all these distracting, contradictory elements that are just there for no reason.
Yeah. Well, what I mean by this is like
national treasure.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Like that's what I'm saying is that like Ready Player One saying, "Hey, we're in The Shining now." Like that doesn't exist for a reason. They don't go to The Shining to demonstrate, you know, the stress of isolationism or like what alcoholism does to people or like any of the various themes that The Shining is very clearly setting up in its narrative. It's just saying, hey, look, it's The Shining, you know, like, yeah. Remember
like
this?
Lone Survivor at least engages with the media it's referencing on the level of understanding it and caring about it beyond just iconography, where Ready Player One is like, it takes a movie where the protagonist says, "I am not a gun," and then uses him as like a war machine for fun, cool points, and then doesn't acknowledge that contradiction at all, and then everyone's supposed to clap.
Yeah.
That's horror.
So it's just one of those things.
That's the true horror.
It's one of those
That's
things.
The survival horror of this discussion.
It's so bad. It is true though. You're completely right. And like, I feel like, you know, there's so much we didn't even touch on here in this discussion that happens in Signalis. That's like really powerful stuff.
We never mentioned the beach, which is just this beach where you see these white spots that seem like wave smooth stones, but as you progress you keep seeing more and more of them until you realize that all of those stones on the beach are all skulls that are buried into the surface.
The shore of oblivion. It's the very level that you are on that beach is a reference to that painting that you can see. And my personal read on that is that is a shore somewhere on Veneta where the main war conflict happened in the text, but it's unclear. It's completely unclear what exactly is happening there. And it's just, I think Signalis is a profound piece of narrative art. And there, you know, I know a lot of people will probably take this as like in horror, but I think Signalis is as good as, if not better than, Silent Hill 2. And I think it's maybe the only survival horror game I've ever played that is as committed to telling a truly literary constructed narrative in the same way that Silent Hill 2 is, but manages to even evolve off of that by having such a powerful ludonarrative in how its gameplay is structured and all of the things it's doing, with all of its references and its stylistic themings.
Probably, I think I need to revisit Silent Hill 2 and also just get into discussions of it more, where like I feel like it's got a reputation of its own, but not necessarily for reasons that are related to what it's actually doing. And so discussions about it are very shallow. And I've never actually heard very interesting takes about Silent Hill 2 ever. It's just like, it's like uncritically the best game of all time alongside Ocarina of Time, but not in any ways that tell me anything special about it. And so I'm always like, what though? And I'm not entirely sure that the people that love it do have anything to say about it, interestingly, in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of the same.
To go and it's about
you
trauma,
hear a lot of the same
and also
things.
Like maybe you were the bad guy the whole time, and maybe you did this to your wife and stuff, and that's like the level of depth it goes to. But like that kind of discussion is like the equivalent of like the crib from like Folding Ideas. It's like coming away from Annihilation and being like, and then the shimmer will live on and they're gonna have a shimmer baby, and I'm like, that's not the point of this movie. Is the reality, like the factual sequence of events of what happens next from the ending. It's like it's supposed to be like what the metaphor is going for. It's like when you have an ambiguous ending, it forces you to engage with the subtext and wonder about that, but that doesn't mean people do.
Definitely. I think so. Just to just to defend myself a little bit here, you know, not defend, but you know what I'm saying. Silent Hill 2, I think, is a legendary game. I think it is incredible, but I totally agree with you. I think the way people talk about it often is a parroting of arguments that people have heard 1,000 times. You know, they're saying like, you'll hear a lot of things like, oh, like it's a really literary narrative. The characters have such deep themes. Like, for example, you know, like Eddie's a social outcast and then he lashes out at people. And it's like, that's not really that deep of a theme. That's a very shallow read of that character, and like misses the interesting way that the story is using him structurally. Or like the thing that I like to focus on, or not focus on, but like one of the things I like to bring up in discussions of Silent Hill 2 is how the game uses symbols. And I don't mean like letters. I mean like loaded symbology to communicate things to the player in a way that a lot of games didn't at the time. So a really good example of this is Angela is always associated with fire and Eddie is associated with ice. After
Don't
dealing
you
with
fight
Eddie,
him in like a meat cooler?
You fight him in a meat cooler, yeah. After fighting Eddie, before meeting Angela at the end, James goes to the hotel and has to wade through a water area. And as you know from one of the endings, James is in a car that is slowly submerging with Mary in the trunk as he is drowning. So you have this interesting parallel of like James is literally in between Angela's hell and Eddie's hell. And it is represented ludonarratively, not only with one of the endings, but this literal level you have to traverse as James is dealing with his trauma, which is placed directly between the climax of Angela's trauma and the climax of Eddie's. So, like, it's stuff like that that makes me appreciate Silent Hill 2. And it's a thing that a lot of people don't talk about because they're very stuck on the raw plot. Like Angela was, sexually abused, so you fight her dad, which looks like two people humping on a bed. That's so deep. And it's like, that's cool. I mean, it's like an interesting piece of the story and of the design, but it's like missing what the actual game is doing with that moment in juxtaposition with all of the other things in the narrative. And I think that cohesive wholeness...
Angela's the one that she lays down on the ground staring into a knife by a mirror in a burning room, right?
The room isn't burning when she does that, but yes, she says like, it always looks like this to me later on, which implies like her version of Silent Hill is just always in flames. But yes, that is Angela. And like, there's just a lot.
I'm drawn to visuals more than names.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, that's what I'm saying though, is that I think Silent Hill 2 is a victim of being legendary. It's very easy to play Silent Hill 2 and understand the very surface level things that people talk about because they have talked about them so much and they've been digested and put into other narratives in video gaming for years and years and years. I mean, Signalis benefits from the fact that people know Silent Hill. And yeah, Echo benefits from the fact that people know and understand what Silent Hill means. And sort of the language it uses to communicate its themes to its player. But I do think from like a literary and like narratology perspective, Silent Hill 2 is a very profound game. That's not to say that I think it's perfect. It is not my favorite game of all time, but I do really appreciate it and I do really like it. But yeah, Signalis blew my socks off. I have not been so obsessed with the game since I can't even remember. I played Signalis, and this never happens. I never do this. I played Signalis to completion 4 times in a row because I loved it so much. I can get that game down in like 2.5 hours now, I think. Maybe a little bit longer than that. Maybe like 3.5.
That survival horror loop where you just crunch the game until it's just an afternoon.
But I don't think I've done a game.
I don't think I've done that with any game since Bastion, and that's a very short game.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean that gets to something kind of cool with Signalis though. Is you mentioned earlier on, you get this flashlight, and this flashlight takes up an inventory space. And I might blow your mind telling you this. You only need the flashlight, I think, 3 times in the game. It's useful in 3 moments.
But they torture you with how often that They torture you with how often you're potentially going to walk into a scenario you can't get through without the flashlight.
Exactly.
Including an entire level that is a labyrinth of death wires you can't see unless you have the flashlight on you right now. And it's just it's just such a problem to not have the flashlight that I constantly wanted to have it on me for the rest of the game at that point. I was convinced they were going to hit me with a boss that I couldn't defeat without the flashlight at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that kind of works out. But yeah, like Signalis is just, it's so cool. Everything that it does is so cool. And we haven't even talked about how it is just a visually cool game. Like, especially if you're a sucker for cyberpunk, if you like stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner, this game is just like a visual like explosion for you. I was in awe the entire time looking at it because it is gorgeous. The way that it looks as like a PS1 throwback early 3D game is incredible. But then
what it does with
also
lighting.
I know,
One
it's
of the other reasons to
amazing.
keep the flashlight on you is it just looks so nice to turn
It's
on at any
so
given
good.
moment.
But then also just like its cutscene direction. I mean, its cutscenes are primarily 2D, anime styled kind of moments mixed with these like low poly 3D. But this game has better cutscene direction than most AAA action games. Like, this is something that I harp on about video games, and I also harp on about anime. A lot of anime and a lot of video games have a really bad habit of being like, we need the player to pay attention, so we are going to put two characters talking center frame, mid shot, like bust shots, and just have them stand on two sides and go, I am talking. Yes, I am too. And they just bounce back and forth together, and that's it.
Yep.
Signalis does not do that. Signalis's cutscenes are extraordinarily well shot. They communicate very interesting things. Their transitions in moments are incredibly meaningful. Like every single frame it is showing you at any moment is giving you visual information to work with. And it's on another level that most games just are not operating on. And I wish games looked like Signalis. Not even talking about the graphics, just talking about how they direct cutscenes and cinematics. It's unbelievable how good it looks.
I'm just gonna die angry that like in 2017, Horizon Zero Dawn's conversations were no more advanced than Mass Effect 1's a decade ago.
Yes.
I'm like, what is happening to AAA gaming? What the fuck is this game? Has like 10 times the budget of the game that I'm referencing, and that game had more emotive cutscenes somehow, despite the jank and like Turian's eyes glitching out and women having really weird long necks and stuff. Like they were more emotive than characters in Horizon Zero Dawn. I don't understand what's happening. I'm supposed to pay attention to this, and it's the most boring thing I've ever seen.
I think it's just it's very cool to see the things that indie developers are trying to do. And this might get me crucified in the comments, but
Get 'em.
I play a lot of indie games, and to be honest, when people talk about us living in like the golden era of indie games are better than AAA games. A lot of the times, like, I just don't agree. Like, yes, there are very, very good indie games, and they are awesome. But if you look at the output of indie games, so many of them are so bad and just don't have a very good understanding of things that I think a lot of people have brushed aside. People are so used to games not having good cinematography or not having good writing that they often don't worry about that. And when they play an indie game that has like great gameplay or like a cool idea, they get really enamored by the cool idea. And they're like, oh, like this is doing something different. And I often agree, like that's really cool. But there are so many moments when I play an indie game and I'm like, I love what they're trying to do, but trying is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. And so to see something like Signalis hit so profoundly and so confidently is just such a breath of fresh air. And this is not me shitting on all indie games. Indie games are great. I love them. I'm glad that indie games
it's
work.
a fire hose of crap.
Exactly.
And then we have the privilege of being able to just pick out the best parts and so on. And like so much of indie games are trying and failing, but it's a relief from the other side of the industry where
there's no excuse.
The AAA industry does the same thing that a lot of blockbusters do in movies and so on, where it's just like they have all the resources in the world to try with, and instead they're not. Instead, they're just iterating and they're chasing algorithms and trying to give people what have they supposedly provably want, and ignoring the fact that all of the most legendary things that ever existed in every format are things that tried and did these big things and took these big swings and are really interesting. Like the
Yep.
Silent Hill 2s didn't happen, generally speaking, from trying to be the third Ant-Man movie. Like that's not
Yes,
the thought process that led to their creation. Like they were iterating on
Exactly.
survival horror, and they're like, oh well, these things have deep themes sometimes, and that's like there was like some level of genre incentive on some way. I'm not saying it's completely in a vacuum from profit, but we're trying to make artistic choices beyond just making money and iterating on the ideas. And so that's why it's like it's actually shocking when you get like a The Last of Us Part 2 and you're like, oh shit, we're taking swings today. Like we're trying to do something today.
Art does exist. I forgot.
Yeah. So I'm so used to like Horizon Zero Dawn where I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
They had
Well,
a setting,
this is what I talk about.
and they had a story, and then they just executed that, and then they filled it with busy work, and they had no deeper, seemingly like goals for this project whatsoever. Like it is the surface level read of what they're going for seems to be the only point of the project.
Yes. And like I think about that too, like especially I'm playing The Last of Us Part 2 for my channel right now. I'm doing pre-recorded Let's Plays, so I'm playing it on my own and then like just, talking about it while I play, sort of the same way that your channel operates. And it is just like I cannot express to people the experience of playing a game that is like genuinely artistically motivated and like oozing polish and competence. And like, yes, this is not me dismissing the the horrible crunch conditions that happened at Naughty Dog and all of that stuff. All of that is very worth talking about, but we should really treasure when a AAA game or a something of that budget actually uses its budget well. And like we live in a world where, Warner Brothers spends $400 million making Batman versus Superman. And that sounds awful. That's terrible. It sucks that happened. But we also live in a timeline where Warner Brothers spent $345 million making Blade Runner 2049. And like that is a crowning achievement that we should be celebrating as like, holy crap, maybe
the impossible idea of
stuff.
a worthy sequel to Blade Runner, but also a movie we're still talking about.
Yes. And like not only that,
we
but
all
like
forgot RoboCop had a reboot. Like no one remembers that.
Yes,
no one remembers any
exactly.
of the reboots and sequels that have tried to capture on any level of legendary past shit pretty much universally. Blade Runner number has joined the canon of things people talk about a decade later, and probably 2 decades later, because it has that level of actual like interesting like thematic resonance, and it has things to say and is actually challenging its audience to think about it. And it's like, isn't this better? Don't you want things you remember tomorrow?
Yeah,
this is great.
And I guess part of what I'm saying is like you don't need a big budget to do something incredible, and I think Signalis proves that. But that also doesn't mean we should be dismissing the value of having a big budget and doing something incredible. Because, in a perfect world, that's what we would get. We would get big budget movies that are artistic.
In a perfect world, Pathologic 2 is funded.
Yes, exactly. In a perfect world, Pathologic 2 has a budget of $200 million and makes back that budget in the first day, or The Last of Us Part 2 is a great example of that. But this is all a long-winded way of me saying it's very profound for me to play an indie game that is building off the corpses of games significantly more legendary and significantly larger budget than it, while also not only iterating on those games, but delivering with the same confidence and polish that those games had. That's truly just fucking crazy. Like, we are so lucky to live in a world where that exists. So truly, hats off. And it's gay. And like it's gay. It's got good representation.
It's gay.
And, while I do think its representation has quickly fallen into a sort of flanderized fandom where all people want to talk about is they'll play Signalis and then they'll be like, it's the lesbian game about lesbian robots. Yay. And then they miss the rest of what that game is doing. I am profoundly happy that, yet again, it's a big W for the gays getting to own another really good piece of art. Like, yeah, we did it again. So Signalis just fucking rules. It is the coolest game. In there, I'm glad it's been really heralded by not only the survival horror community, but just the indie gaming community in general. There are tons of video essays about it that are, if you're looking for more meat to dig into with it, that you can definitely watch. Even just reviews of the game have been really great, really picking up all the threads and commenting on often really unique reads and interesting themes that the game is putting out. So just to shout out a few, Boulder Punch, I think, did a review of Signalis that was really great. Avalanche Reviews did one that I think was really great. Nitro Rad's review of Signalis, both in his standalone video and his best games of last year video, are just love letters to that game. And those videos deserve attention. I don't mean to shill other channels. We are not sponsored by Nitro Rad, and I do not know him. But seriously, watch Nitro Rad's channel. His content is truly some of the best on YouTube when it comes to deep diving, platform specific and genre specific games.
I just know Avalanche because I asked them how to use the FrameMeister.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea. Yeah, I like his channel. His channel's pretty good.
It's an extremely Resident Evil dedicated channel to the point of like comprehensively covering every single individual game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, he has like videos of like all the modern Resident Evil clones and stuff like that. His channel's great. He's very prolific. I really like his stuff. But yeah, overall, man, Signalis, it's up there with like, and this is only gonna hit for like 10 people who are listening right now, maybe, but Signalis is like right there with Yume Nikki for me. It's that level of like profoundly good indie game that is going to influence creators for decades to come.
Yume Nikki is the kind of like LSD-ish one, right? The top-down RPG maker wander around dream simulator thing.
Yes. So it's one of the first major indie RPG maker breakout hits. Kind of an Earthbound like in a lot of ways, but it is the template from which all wander around and do stuff, artsy things in RPG Maker. It's the template from which all of those games are basically built off of. Yeah, that is a profoundly good game. That is one of the best horror games ever made. People should play it. Yume Nikki fucking rules. It's almost 20 years old now too. And people are still talking about it. Weirdos on the internet like me have GeoCities fan sites dedicated to Yume Nikki. And
one of those games where even if you haven't played it, you played a game by people who played it at this point.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you've played Undertale is heavily influenced by Yume Nikki. So is Omori. Lisa is as well. Yep. Lisa, I believe, directly cites it. Off was made on starmen.net, or it was translated on starmen.net, but was made by a person who directly cites Yume Nikki as an influence. So Mortis Ghost, I think is his name, right?
Yeah.
Or their name. I'm not sure their gender, but yeah, Off is very directly influenced by Yume Nikki. That game is very profoundly good. But yeah, I like Signalis on that level. It is one of those things where I will, on my grave, on my deathbed, be telling my great grandchildren, hey, play. I'll write it in my will. Play Signalis. Log into my Steam account. Here are my credentials. Play Signalis, because it's just fantastic and developed by two German people. Their studio is called Rose Engine. Really cool with that too. The music and the game went through tons of different iterations too. You can find old beta screenshots of what the game originally looked like. I mean, at one point it was like a point and click adventure game. It just so cool. A really, really profoundly good game. But yeah. Shout outs to what are the composers? Like Dead 1,000 Cicadas or something like that. No, 1,000 Eyes and Cicada Sirens are the composers of the music in the game. And The soundtrack for Signalis is fantastic. Just lovely, lovely music.
I feel like it's often a good sign for a game when they have to change genre in development. Because that means the idea behind it was stronger than the actual like thing that they were, the actual like facts of the game.
I also want to specify, if the Rose Engine people are listening, I did not mean to over-interpret your story. Obviously, Signalis takes a lot from David Lynch as well, and the creators have been very vocal on Twitter and stuff that like there are no hard answers. So all of this is just what I read in the plot, you know, and there's a lot in there to read. There's a lot of text to go through. It's all on the wiki if you want to read it and try to piece it together yourself. Fans have done a really, really great job of compiling stuff for the game. So if you're interested, Signalis is ripe for interpretation and mining and reading into. It's just, aesthetically speaking, such a home run. It is so cool.
I'm thinking about like to reference something I've never seen. I think this comes up with Madoka Magica, but also like I'm thinking of Devilman Crybaby or Devilman in general, and also Silent Hill 1. I'm trying to remember, what's the daughter's name in Silent Hill 1? Cheryl? Cheryl, I think.
Well, Cheryl is
the other daughter,
Harry's daughter.
The Silent Hill's history daughter, the one that was tortured. Like
what's her name?
The arguably the franchise villain of Silent Hill, as comical it is to say that phrase.
Yes. What is her name? Alessa.
Alessa.
That's what it is.
I was thinking of like, this is my shallow interpretation of Silent Hill because I only played each game once and then I'm still working through them. But like
Alessa Gillespie, that's her name. I couldn't remember her last name.
Like it feels like a reasonable interpretation of Silent Hill 1 is that Alessa was the tragedy of what happened to Alessa was so fucked up and traumatic that it essentially broke reality and created Silent Hill as like the rest dimension, like the hellscape that you can end up in, essentially. Like that feels like what's more or less happening when you play the first game. I say as somebody who didn't even get the good ending because I missed an entire level. I literally didn't find it in the overworld at the end, so I just walked to the ending on accident and just I never saved the I think you can save Sybil by playing an entire optional level that you could just never find, and I never did that. So I'm not
canon though.
So to be honest, I'm more informed by the movie. I'm basing my knowledge of Silent Hill 1 on the movie, which very much spells out this version of the interpretation where what happens to Alessa creates the Silent Hill as we know it, essentially. And we essentially here have a version of that. Like you have this hell world that has this point of trauma in the past, but I think this ties into Madoka, but it definitely happens in Devilman. There's this element where you have this crossing of the apocalypse and love, and then specifically Signalis feels like an inversion of the Silent Hill 1 ending, where instead of this world being ended by trauma, Signalis is essentially a world ended by love, because their connection spreads through their entire society and it was brought together by love, and the final note is that connection. But like it depersonalized, like it escaped them to the point where they don't even remember each other correctly anymore. But this love that this one unit had for this one woman spread through their entire known civilization and ended it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really interesting too, because I mean, if you want to talk about other themes that this is talking about, like there's a gay robot and a gay painter who was told their entire life in civilization, like, don't do that, but love triumphs all. And it doesn't matter that, you know, what the society was saying. It from some perspective, and I'm not saying this in a defense of fascism, I'm saying it more from the perspective of fascism. The fascists were right she was a danger to their society. What happens when her heretical thoughts break out and all of the youth become degenerate lesbians and painters and art focusing on the cause? Yeah, you know fucking what? We take over society because we should be allowed to. Love triumphs all.
I was gonna say, like, there is an interpretation where it almost sounds like a bad thing that, like, the lesbians ended the world by being lesbians essentially and caring about art and so on. But
yeah, I think the game does a good job of portraying that, you know.
But like the thing is that the fascist civilization created that problem. Like
yes,
the love
exactly.
The love ended the world, but it didn't create the situation where love would end the world. This nightmarish hive mind neural network where no one is allowed to have a personality or individual thought or interests, and is temporary and disposable and monitored for their stability and disposed of at will. Like that setup directly caused that entire world to happen and just crumble the moment anyone had a personality anymore. And it's tragic to see because there's little vignettes throughout the entire game of individual people that do care and have interests, and you wonder, were these similar dissidents or divergences from this like lockstep society, or are they all just copies of the same relationship over and over again? You have you get to talk to a version of the first boss fight in a hallway, just laying on the ground, and she's just going to die there. She can't leave. And in the Razor hallways, there's a part where you find like several bodies, and then next to them is somebody crying over a dying person who's trying to comfort them in their final moments, trying to tell them that everything's fine. And the other bodies aren't even acknowledged, so you don't even know the context for why there's so many other bodies that look like them right next to them while the scene's playing out, as if it keeps playing out on loop or something, or versions of it keep echoing. Like these people are repeating like Dark Souls ghosts, like those white phantoms that replay events over and over again. It's just a lot. It's a lot to unpack there.
I mean, and there's like so much that gets into this with like just talking about some of the units, you know. There are these multiple replica templates that are based on different people. And the Mina unit, which is they are sent into the mines, like Mina birds, sort of like mine canaries is where that name comes from, I think. They are the first boss. The first boss in the game is a Mina unit that has been corrupted. But then immediately after, you encounter another one, and she's just the nicest person in the game. Like you talk to her and she's like, oh, hi, like, thanks for stopping to talk to me. I'm fucked, so you can leave. It's okay. Like, I won't hold it against you if you just let me die. Oh, you're still talking to me. Well, that's so sweet. I wish you the best. And like, you get these characters that are sort of all stuck in this really tragic situation, but it's their kindness and their reaching out to others that has protected them. And like, there's a through line in the game's secondary character stories of like not just doing what you are told is why so many of the incidental characters that you do meet survive as long as they have. At one point, you meet a Yule unit, I believe. Is it a Yule? No, it's a Storch unit who is like standing back. The Storch units are basically like facility managers. They're meant to go around and like discipline people for not working. They're just like general managers that are vaguely military trained. They have big legs so that they can see over all of the people in the factory. That's what their purpose is. But you just find one who's just like chilling in an administrator room. And when she sees you, she's like, yo, you were out there. It's fucked. I'm not going out there. What are you talking about? I don't want to turn into them. And you're like, you were literally supposed to be protecting people. And they're like, yeah, no, I don't care. I'm not doing that.
I'm not like, going out there.
Like that makes sense. You know, I guess more power to you.
I just had the most cursed thought that, like, so by crunching all of society into being 6 individuals total, repeating over and over again, essentially, they turned, like, this fascist nightmare society turned the world into bananas. Like, yeah, I think that's the one I'm thinking of, where like I think that's the correct fruit to think about here, where it's like we've shrunken the world's banana stock into being one strain that, and it can all be wiped out by one disease, essentially.
Yes.
By
Yeah.
literally reducing the biodiversity to one thing. And so we've taken the infinite variety of the human race and we've crunched it into 6 people over and over again.
Yes.
And then they get wiped out by a disease.
Yeah. And there's a really profound thing going on here too, because they take all 6 people, or, you know, all of these different templates, and the Gestalt population is slowly decreasing as they're being replaced by all these replicas of Gestalt people that did exist at one time. And they're putting them all into these cookie cutter situations where they all experience the same frustrations. And then no one stopped to think what would happen if they selectively bred them all to be bioresident espers that communicate through a telepathic hive mind. Like, of course, if people have frustrations with your society, allowing them to organize will cause this society to fall. So in a quest for domination, as fascist civilizations often do, they consolidated power, and then their power structure flipped on them. Because as we witness in the game, the Falca unit absorbed basically everyone's frustrations and then just fucking quit. She was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm laying myself to rest. And there's a really cool visual connection between Ariane and the Falca unit. But then also the Falca unit is experiencing like all of the other replicas' memories. So she thinks that she's Elster. And it's like, it's kind of getting, I think, at this idea that like our frustrations with society and the things that we struggle through and our traumas are often much closer to each other than we think. And in fact, if we were just like, in some sense, it's probably a good thing that we don't have endless, unmitigated empathy, because if we did, if we just felt everything all the time, we would immediately realize that society hardly works and just shut down. Because that's very much what happens with the Falca unit, who is told you are meant to uphold and be an icon of our society. And then she is met with this telekinetic, telepathic connection to perhaps the core of society's issues, and literally just goes to bed forever until we kill her as the final boss, which is just insane. And like, it's really interesting to see that play out and see how this game constructs this authoritarian society and makes you concerned for this society. Like, there are moments in Signalis where I was like, oh yeah, like People's Revolution, like take over, like beat the Empire back. But then you realize like, oh no, actually this People's Revolution has been co-opted by authoritarians. This isn't good. We should not be rooting for them. But then at the same time, they're also the only characters that we meet. So we have to learn from and understand the world through their perspective before we can see why it should burn, and understand that in some sense, this ending, whether it be the artifact ending where Ariane and Elster, you know, dance forever and in some sort of liminal afterlife on that ship, or just have like a meaningful one moment that lasts throughout the ages, or the Promise ending even where they, you know, Elster kills Ariane and then dies, like in a lot of ways, very similar to The Last of Us season 1, episode 3. Spoilers for The Last of Us season 1, episode 3. It recontextualizes character deaths as a win for them. And it's really interesting to see that play out in Signalis.
What's one of the worst like TV tropes takes ever was people seeing that episode of The Last of Us and thinking, oh, it's another bury your gays. And I'm like, no, this is an unbury of the gays. That was a very buried gay in the game that they then gave an entire happy life and let die of natural causes. That's just inevitable. People are mortal, the gays, which given the
don't worry, gays, we're taking dying back.
I mean, and it's like, it's important too, because like that episode had a line that was like I like you, older means we're still here, because yes, his like gays and queerness and trans people and so on have an infinite history because we've always been here, but we have what feels like a very temporary short history because our visibility is only recently resurfaced on the level that it has been. So it feels like our history practically started with disco. And so like one of the most significant memories for gay history is a traumatic mass death from a horrible disease. And so people surviving past that and getting to even exist in old age is such a rare experience, from like between abuse and hate crimes and suicide and disease and the number of threats that are specifically faced for being in this group. It's less common to have people who are gay and old, because if you grew up in the right time to be old now, you likely didn't come out of the closet and just lived miserably forever and never had this life. So like people who started coming out are only a certain age for the most part. So it's actually incredibly unusual to see old gays, or even gays that die of normal, like for normal reasons, which, so another little side note, like that's a nice little detail in The Walking Dead's comic, as opposed to its show, is it commits to also being like, no, there will be old gays in this universe. Like it's a specific element there that's God, I've lost the original thread of how we got here a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think the point that I was making with Signalis is like, you get to have a story of oppression repositioned as a story of a story of a tragedy of oppression repositioned as a story of beauty, and as sort of a fight back against these systems that have oppressed them. And so by the end, yes, one can argue, okay, Ariane destabilized this Elster unit and caused the end of the world. But also, if there's going to be an end of the world, it may as well be for love, right? And in a beautiful way, it's finishing up the story of these people that came before them and this journey that all the Elsters go on. It doesn't really matter that their memories are quote unquote not their own individually. The story of the Elster unit is the story of Lilith and Alina, and is the story of Elster and Ariane. And so you have these really profound connections where it takes meaningless tragedy and across an entire society and makes all of that tragedy really meaningful in a way that ultimately, yes, destroys that society, but also is sort of a fight back against what that society wanted. It is a great rejection of oppression and fascism, which I think is very cool. I think it's a very human story ultimately. At the end of the day, it shares that Blade Runner quality of like, what is identity and like, how do I factor into all of this on a very grand scale that normally I feel like stories about identity don't really fit into very well. So, I mean, hats off to Rose Engine for that, because it's incredibly impressive what they were able to do.
There's an interesting little motif that, and this could be severe grasping because I don't know what I'm talking about usually, but so the downfall of this entire nightmare society was brought on by a queer couple being isolated from it and cut off from it, essentially, and being able to exist on its own and interact and actually sort of recapture what made them themselves and so on. And then while the society is being brought down by its overconnected, like lockstep organization, every single person who survives, as you pointed out, for any amount of time is somebody who specifically is disconnecting from that and behaving individualistically instead. So I'll preface this by saying I don't know anything about telecommunication or radios or call signs or any of the related words that are the correct things I should say right here. But when you're on the radio and you're triangulating for the correct station and so on that one computer, one of the signals that comes up is called Magpie, which you actually use to open up a thing. And that is the same tone that plays on the start menu every time you launch the game, and periodically throughout the game there's a 3-note sequence that goes ba da da. And
Yep.
at least as an American who grew up in the 90s and so on, that's immediately followed by, we're sorry, your call did not go through. Every time you would hear that chime on a phone, like that is, I'm almost certain it's the exact same 3 notes I grew up hearing over and over again. It's just like you make some kind of call to an invalid number or like not a busy signal, but something else, like some kind of problem would come up and it would go boo doo doo. We're sorry, your call did not go through. Please blah 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 blah.
That tone is referred to as the 3-note oddity, and it actually comes from a number station that is referred to as the 3-note oddity. It is the same tone you're hearing. Interestingly enough, obviously Ariane grew up in a broadcast station. Her mother was a number station operator for this nation. The word Elster means magpie. So there are connections here to all of these things. In fact, all of the units are named after birds. Adler being eagle, Yule being owl, Storch being stork, Falk being falcon. I think
the obvious
There's
one.
one more. There's one more I can't remember. What isn't it? Colibri, I think, is maybe hummingbird. I think that's right. And I think there's one other unit. Storch, Yule, Falca. Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember all of them. Yeah.
Euler
so they're all named after birds.
Erar is macaw. Adler is eagle. Falk is falcon. Luster is magpie. Miner is
Mina, yeah.
Yeah. Where's the? I don't see a reference to what the thing's called. Whatever.
A mina is literally just a bird.
Oh, Mina's already a bird. Okay.
Yeah. Spelled the same exact way. So yeah, just kind of interesting. It's a cool motif. I just love the usage of birds, and I love the usage of classical music as well is all very interesting, all connected to this bird symbology too. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with the game that I think is just ripe for this sort of rich lore interpretation. That's a term I use, like rich lore versus shallow lore. Rich lore being like, okay, there's a lot of item descriptions, there's a lot of text to read, but there's also like genuine thematic stuff to tie into all of this, and like stuff that might just be cool if you look at it in kind of isolation, like, oh, like all of them are named after birds, that's cool. Like a hummingbird, hums at a certain frequency, and they're
the villains of this game are called Adam and Eve.
Yes, like exactly. But you can especially in Signalis, like these connections go like 6 or 7 layers deep, where it's like, okay, these units are all named after birds. All of the birds have a specific connection to each other. All of those connections are mirrored by the characters, and you can see characters interact in ways that mirror those connections, which mirror those birds. And I think it's very rich in its subtext. It's very, for lack of a better word, strict about how it applies things in a way that communicates some very potent meaning and isn't just there to be there. And I love that about it. I think it is just profoundly good. I mean, especially when you consider things like the paintings that they use, the music that they use, the specific tarot cards, and like layouts that they're using, they're all tied together in such an interesting fashion that it becomes, to use a bad term affectionately, it becomes the kind of puzzle box that isn't bullshit. like J.J. Abrams wishes he could build a story.
Mystery box.
This mystery box. Yes. Sorry. He wishes he could build a story this meaningful and gratifying to pull apart and open and interface with. And I want to specify, I'm not saying Signalis is, a lost style mystery box. It's more, I don't know.
My favorite part of the game was the part where you go into a random cave and there's a pirate's wheel sticking out of the wall, and then you turn it, and then the space station teleports.
Yes, exactly.
And that's never mentioned again.
But I guess what I'm saying more or less is I think there is a difference between being ambiguous and having mysteries for the sake of like forcing someone to engage with the very cool mysteries you have set up, and being mysterious and ambiguous as shorthand for kind of needing people to just kind of run with it because there's nothing there to mine. And I think, that's where Signalis succeeds. Is it is very ambiguous and very open-ended, and there's a lot of mystery to it and to what it means. But as evidenced by the fact that we just talked about all of this, there is actually stuff to mine there. Like, there is meat, there is flesh underneath the world of Signalis, quite literally and narratively. And I just think we're just so lucky to have that. And it rocks that it's in a game that fucking rules. It's a great game to play. It's a fun survival horror game. It's one of the first survival horror games, especially indie survival horrors, that I've played in a long time, where I'm like, this game fucking gets it. Like, it knows what makes this genre cool and interesting and fun to play. And it manages to make something really special out of it.
It's always exciting just whenever you think about something and then get rewarded for thinking about it, instead of just getting problems instead and be like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, no, fuck.
Exactly.
Why did I interrogate this at all? This was a mistake. This thing's actually garbage.
So this should be a shining endorsement for anyone who watches your Let's Play or doesn't watch your Let's Play and watches this video just because they're curious. Like, buy Signalis. They deserve all the money in the world. If Rose Engine goes the way of Ice Pick Lodge and does not make their money back for their incredible art project, and they go unrewarded for making amazing art, I'm going to hold it against people. I'm going to be very upset. There's going to be a very angry raccoon on the internet who is out to get you because you did not buy Signalis.
A very tiny person's going to be very angry with you.
It's on Game Pass, so all Xbox people or PC Game Pass people play it there, I guess, because that helps them from what I understand. But also buy it because it rules, and it's only like $20.
Play it. I think it's still worth playing, even if you've sat through all this, even though it was obviously a spoiler cast thing, because like it's kind of like it doesn't. I think about how like it doesn't really matter how, if you know how Annihilation ends, for example, and like it stands up to rewatching and so on. Like, there are narratives that are all about just kind of passing through a metaphor from front to back over and over again. They're not really about like the reveals along the way necessarily. So it doesn't like fall apart from knowing things about it. It's about experiencing it itself. And then in fact, knowing more about it, playing it, and then playing it again and so on. Like, you just keep getting more out of it that you pick up on over again. That's like it's exactly the kind of game you would make a video essay about, because the most satisfying element of making a video essay isn't finishing the video, but is specifically getting engaging with the piece of media you care about a lot, and then realizing that the more you revisit it and ask questions and look closer at it, you just end up getting more out of it, and that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't start the project in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, it's so special. Like, that's the thing, is this is one of those pieces of art, one of these games that I think about and I really want to talk about, but I end up hitting a wall where it's so rich and meaningful in my head that the only words that come out are like, fuck, man, Signalis rules. Like, we're so lucky. Like, how special. Just because it is something that just aesthetically, even if you're not mining it for meaning, and even if you're just there to play a good game, like, it is so rich in value. It's just a cool experience on its own, and it's something that I think, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't play. And that's before you even get to all the cool shit. Like, the puzzles in this game are some of the best in any survival horror game I've played in a very long time. I really love the planets puzzle. And I won't spoil how it's done, but where you're, Keith, you'll remember it, with the astrolabe in the dark room, where you have to see the location of the planets and puzzle them out at a later point. That puzzle, I was just over the moon about it. I thought it was so good. And then like things like the key card puzzle are also just, it's doing a thing that I think a lot of survival horror games have moved past doing. The way it is designed as a game harkens back to the survival horror.
It briefly felt like it was making fun of puzzles in survival horror games.
Yes.
Specifically the less good ones. Because like Silent Hill has at its best these really specific, interesting ones that are like full of weird bespoke assets and lore and like riddles and stuff. But Resident Evil at its worst, especially in the remake sometimes, is just like, would you like to play the 3 jug puzzle from all those other games you've already played? There's 3 different containers of different sizes and there's water and you got to keep changing between them. And Signalis at one point has a 3 jug puzzle and next to it is an irritated explanation of how to solve it.
How to solve it. Exactly. Step by step. Yep.
Yes.
It's so funny. Yeah, there's so much going on.
Literally
in that
the
game.
worst thing in Resident Evil 2 remake in
It's
the entire game
it's amazing.
is that it has a 3 jug puzzle.
It's amazing how they deal with that too, and it's just like it's just so clever in its usage of these things. And I'm not an influencer, I'm not a podcaster, and I doubt that they would ever come on to a show to actually talk about their game like that. But I would love to get coffee with Rose Engine and just be like, please tell me what was in your brain. I will not share it with the internet. I don't care about what the story means. I just want to know what you were thinking because I need to understand. I need to see the survival horror world through your eyes because I know that there's magic there and I want to go to that place. So it's a really profound game and one that I think is really special and one that I think that people should definitely experience. And it's just cool. It's cool. It's cool in the same way that like Bloodborne is cool. It's cool in the same way that Yume Nikki is cool. It's one of those things that I feel cool when I talk about because I'm like, yes, see my taste on display. I like the cool thing.
This is my real incentive to care about these things. Personal status.
Exactly. Like not even personal status, just like aesthetic value. Like I am one of the cool people who likes Signalis because it is a cool thing.
I've invented a new form of toxic masculinity where I have the best media opinions. Fuck you.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm toxically masculine by liking Signalis. No, but jokes aside, it's got the appeal. It has that Blade Runner thing where you watch it or you see it and you're like, even if I didn't like this visually, this is just going to define decades of design. Just because it has that je ne sais quoi of like, again, the only word I can think of is just coolness. It's just unique. It's visually interesting, aesthetically pleasing. And, anyone who just kind of throws it off, I think they're doing themselves a disservice because it's something that I don't think is available anywhere else. I don't think it's something that you can just get by playing, other games. Even playing all the games it's influenced by doesn't give you Signalis. Signalis is Signalis. That's all there is. It's tautology.
I keep thinking about... I keep trying so hard not to talk about Echo because I keep thinking about it because we keep talking about indie horror and we're talking about Silent Hill 2. And I don't think I had seen the ending of Silent Hill 2 that you mentioned. So I didn't know about the drowning. I think I got a different ending or something. And then now I'm thinking about...
I think you got the leave ending, I think.
I'm stuck thinking about like the drowning elements of Echo, and I'm thinking about Maria.
Yep.
And what... Yep. I'm like, hello? And that's interesting.
There's so much
unpack.
There. Yeah. There's a lot of amazing stuff going on in Echo, especially. Echo's great.
It's a good time for indie horror.
It is. It's a very good time for indie horror. Indie horror is where it's at, everyone. Like if you think horror movies are bad, don't. Like you're just not watching good horror movies. If you think horror literature isn't some of the most literary stuff out there, you're just wrong. Like there's
it's my favorite.
Much great.
It's my favorite, and it's hard to explain to people sometimes because they think I want scares and gore, and
Yeah.
that's not really the point.
Yeah.
Like, it's horror is just a genre so far beyond it. And then, like, I would like, and we did this. Like, I would rather watch Men, which is a
Yep.
questionable at best horror movie, but is
Yeah.
but is swinging. It's just taking swings. Than like the most competently made action movie that's just like doing action and
Yeah.
just is about having stakes and pulling off stakes and then ending. Like,
Yeah. Like when I think of horror media, my mind immediately jumps to things like Under the Skin and The Witch and The Lighthouse. I do not think of like Friday the 13th or Saw.
No.
Like those are not the things I think of when I think of horror media. Just because like as speaking as someone who works in and around the film industry, you know, like movies like Saw or A Nightmare on Elm Street are these sort of studio productions that over time, of course, are legendary. They're huge franchises. They're very popular. They make a lot of money, but they were kind of farmed out in order to make money for the studio. The Nightmare on Elm Street famously saved, I believe, New Line, and it's called the studio that Freddy built because Nightmare on Elm Street is what kept them afloat. There is value in that. I am not
speaking
shitting
of horror
on
franchises with much gayer sequels.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not shitting on franchised horror, but it's such a small portion of what horror has been known for. In fact, throughout the ages, especially in literary circles. Yeah, especially in literary circles, horror has always been a highbrow sort of inherently symbolic, very artistic medium, you know, a brush that people paint with. In order to cover topics of the time and very clearly, you know, obfuscated narratives and things like that. So it's always interesting to me to hear people talk about like, oh, I don't like horror games because I don't like jump scares. And I'm like, I can't think of a single jump scare in Signalis, and it's one of the best horror games I've ever played. Like when I think of horror games, I'm not thinking of, you know, I think that there's a lot to praise the first Signalis, Amnesia for, but I'm not thinking of Amnesia.
Silent Hill.
Yeah, Darkwood, Silent Hill, exactly. And
Soma,
like I love
which
Resident
a lot of people
Evil.
say to play without the monsters turned on.
Very bizarre.
And it's one of the most distressing narratives.
Yeah. One of the things I think about is like I'm the you know, I feel like in our friend group, maybe not to your viewers, but in our friend group, like I'm the Resident Evil guy. I love all survival horror. I've played all of them many times. I have S+'d all of the remakes. I'm playing Resident Evil 4 right now. But like I don't think of Resident Evil
the furry tail by beating it in 4 hours.
I'm gonna make Leon a little meow meow, and people are gonna have to put up with that.
Yeah.
But you know, as much as I love Resident Evil, like when I think of horror games, I think of stuff like .flow, Yume Nikki, Signalis, to some extent, even stuff like LSD Dream Emulator is like where my brain goes, because that is the stuff that has profoundly influenced a lot of the creators that go on to make other horror games that are more mainstream. So when I talk to people and they're like, what kind of games do you like? And I say horror games. And they're like, oh, like I play the Mortuary Assistant. I'm sure the Mortuary Assistant is fine. Like whatever. But that is not the stuff I think about when I think about horror gaming at all. I think about stuff like Signalis and these more sort of literary slow paced. I think about Pathologic too, if you need like an example, you know? And a lot of people will say like,
I'll never reach the meat of that game. That fucking
yeah.
But Mortuary Assistant, I literally can't get past the part where it's like, go through all the cupboards and pick up a bunch of containers and try to figure out what they are and put them in the right device to make this thing happen. I'm like, I can't get through this. I'm never going to beat this part and actually start the game. I can't. It's so incompatible with me.
A lot of people, I think, get caught up as well on like what it means to be horror media aesthetically. A lot of people are like, well, that game's not scary, so it's not horror. And like, that's just crazy to me, because in my head, like, this is not me humble bragging. I'm more saying like, I know too much about video games to be scared by video games. They don't freak me out. I just am not scared by them. So if the definition of a horror game is a game that scares you, then for me, no video games are horror games. We need a better definition of what that is. And so when I think about horror, I think of the aesthetics of horror. I think about, okay, we have these themes that are approaching, subjects like the loss of self, of mortality, of the end of things, of societal collapse or personal horror, of individual trauma and individual struggle. And like when you look at horror more like that, it becomes more and more clear why I might classify something like LSD Dream Emulator as a horror game. Because sure, 95% of that game is walking around, neon colored pagodas and seeing big-headed people like wander to and from and say weird things. There is a surreality to it that
it's distressing.
Informs. Exactly. It's like distressing. It's deconstructing what we normally view as the world and dreams and ideas, and instead replacing it with something uncanny. And when I say uncanny, I mean like the dictionary definition of uncanny.
Not the Uncanny Valley specifically, but like,
yes.
What's funny is my introduction to LSD as a game was I used to watch a YouTube channel that would just upload really, really high quality, impressive, expert drum playthroughs of Rock Band, like just one of those like next level impossible Rock Band drummers. And he just randomly started uploading videos of LSD one day, like he just got a copy of it or something, and he was fucking terrified of it. It was the scariest thing in the world to him. I was immediately primed to think of it as a horror game, even though it didn't immediately feel that way, because he thought the entire game was scary all the time. It was an Azurite reaction, if anyone remembers ancient Rock Band channels.
Oh, wow. Yeah, for me, it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. Like the way people talk about horror games is just odd to me, because I feel like a lot of people jump immediately to stuff like Outlast or, Five Nights at Freddy's or whatever. And I'm not saying that those games aren't horror games. They're horror games. They are also horror. It's just when I think about the medium, the genre of horror, I am not jumping to these sort of effervescent, ephemeral horror experiences where you're like, oh, I'm scared, and then you move on and they don't mean anything. Like the stuff that freaks me out and that gets to me are the concepts that linger with me over time, right? And that's why things like Signalis, I'll be thinking about this game forever. Every single time I sit down to write something, I am overcome with existential grief over the concept of like, I've never had an original idea in my life. How can I make something good if I'm just a cookie cutter person? I have an entire deleted
chapter in my Beastars essay about this thought.
Exactly.
In which, as a gag, I quoted Hank Green discussing the exact same thing in his book.
Exactly.
Because he has his entire character that's a self-insert is just having a crisis over the fact that he has never had an original thought in his life. Like he's just, every time he goes to be an influencer or do a podcast or go on the news, he's regurgitating a series of like reconstituted thoughts from video essays that he read online and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And like I think about this stuff, and like Signalis gets to the core of that, and like that is unsettling. That's uncanny to think about. Is like, what the fuck does this even mean? Like, how do I exist in this ecosystem? And I think the very best horror media approaches that from the perspective of like, what does it mean and what is your place in it? One of my favorite horror movies of all time is a movie that spawned a bazillion franchise sequels, is Alien. I love the first Alien film. I think it's incredible. And like, when I think about the horror in Alien, I do not think about the xenomorph itself. The horror in Alien is the idea of being a disenfranchised, like blue collar worker, maybe even a woman, put up against this, the horrible truth that the heat death of the universe, or that something awful is out there, and that your corporate interests want it, even if they know that it is going to end the world. and they should be listening to you, they don't care. And they
On
are going to
multiple
go
layers,
after
you
it.
have a loss of bodily autonomy, both because of your labor and because the alien physically like co-opts your body.
Yes.
At
And then
your
there's all the
cost.
psychosexual elements too, of like character gender and identity and what the xenomorph represents and looks like. And then you have the, Wayland Yutani stuff of all of the corporate levels of that. But like when I think about these things, I'm not sitting here saying Alien's my favorite horror movie because the xenomorph is spooky.
Got a spiky
Alien's
tail and acid blood, and that's the whole point.
Exactly. The things that make me love Alien are, wow, this has something very profound to say about like the commodification of labor and people in the face of horrific global, even cosmic environmental collapse, and what that commodification does to both economies and the autonomy of the people within them and stuff like that. So it's just there's so much in horror to mine that I think a lot of people don't give it credit for, or that they feel like they can't connect to because they're like, oh, I don't like horror movies. Like I don't like Friday the 13th. And for me, I'm just like, man, that stuff, if you don't like that stuff, that doesn't mean you don't like horror. Like there's plenty of really amazing horror out there that could totally be for you. Like some of my favorite horror films are not particularly scary. Like just using Under the Skin as an example, Under the Skin on a surface level is a pretty boring movie that not a lot terrifying visually happens in it. There are definitely scary scenes and spooky music, but like for the most part, it's pictured scenes of people walking around and driving around cars. Like that's it. There's not much objectively, quote unquote scary, like a jump scare, terrorizing you moment to moment. But the concepts that it deals with, the ideas of self and being are like deeply unsettling and have very dark implications that I find intriguing. So even if you don't like jump scares, like there's horror media out there for you. You just have to look for it. And of course that can be hard, but maybe look through A24's catalog. I don't know. It's an easy place to start. People joke about it, but hey, I mean, they are the indie horror distributor.
Yeah.
Even though they're technically distributed through Lionsgate, so they're not really that indie.
Yeah, well, indie.
Yeah, indie doesn't
mean
anything anymore.
No, it's they're almost all just like a name that's known for indie stuff that's owned by some other company anyway. Because the entire world is 3 companies or whatever. Hooray! I'm actually a subsidiary of.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
Well, it's like it's like finding out that all of these like auteur directors are actually technically working through contracts with like huge film studios. But there's just we're in an interesting spot. Let's see. Are there any other horror games that I want to think about that I want to recommend to people before we end the episode?
Fun.
Little Nightmares 2 was surprisingly good, and I say that as someone who did not like Little Nightmares 1. Little Nightmares 2 is cool. It's got good themes and great writing and is a really cool puzzle game. Darkwood's good. We both like Darkwood.
Darkwood is very cool, aside from its glaring problem.
Agree.
It's just they sure have a narrative and a gameplay, and then put them next to each other. That was their solution.
Kiddie Horror Show's Anatomy is really good. That's a really great game. One of the few other itch.io amateur indie games that I'm a really big fan of. That's a cool one.
I'm gonna page through and try to find any horror things that were about anything in particular. I'm like, Rule of Rose was interesting.
Rule of Rose, interesting.
Gameplay is actual torture.
Yep.
Like the thing that. So going into survival horror, I was told that the gameplay is bad on purpose was the excuse people always say because you're so disempowered, and there's that contradiction where I always find it strange that you're less powerful in Resident Evil than you are in Silent Hill. Like your Silent Hill rando guy with no military training is way more lethal to hell spawn than a trained soldier / SWAT team member or whatever is against just zombies. Like those two franchises it's really are surprising to compare to each other. But both of them are extremely playable from the very beginning. in a way that contradicts that statement. Rule of Rose is that. Rule of Rose is as bad as you imagine. Like, its combat is as brutally like unfun and as all of those games you imagined them to be before you played them. And when you heard that rumor, Jesus Christ. But it is incredibly interesting to string together all the cutscenes and dialogue and notes that are throughout that, and the imagery it uses, and try to unpack that. That was rewarding in a way that just barely made it worth playing through.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they say, you know, like, oh, the combat's bad on purpose, I think that is not necessarily, I think that it is not on purpose, but I do think that it achieves the ludonarrative thing that they are talking about of like leaving you disempowered. However, the issue with this that I think you're also sort of getting at is that like, it's actually really easy to become extraordinarily resource rich and as such kind of just a walking murder dispenser in games like Silent Hill. Like Silent Hill 2, the combat might be like bad and janky, but like you get some bullets for your gun and you will just kill everything. Like you are never actually threatened in those games.
Yeah, and Resident Evil's famously, like, despite being known as the franchise where you're disempowered, supposedly is famously the franchise that people just blitz through. Like, they immediately learn how to just skip the whole game, like at astonishing speeds.
I mean, and even in Signalis, like this is me, you know, after 4 playthroughs of the game, like knowing how to basically speedrun it. I have like the quick kills down for everything. By the time I finished my 4th run of Signalis, I think I ended the game with like 180 rounds of ammo, like collectively through my weapons. Like,
oh yeah,
that was with me killing stuff. Like I had so much, I had so many resources.
I hit a point where, because I was doing fine on resources and skipping and dodging most encounters and so on, I hit a point where I just started using each item and gun once just to do it.
Yeah.
Because I was not using the weapons. Like, there was never a point where I had to use the second half of the game's new weapons, because like the shotgun and the revolver were more than enough to get through whatever encounters I actually needed to fight in ever. And so it's just how that kind of stuff goes. It's a goofy genre from that perspective sometimes.
Definitely.
I think there's parts of Resident Evil 1 remake and some other games that succeed at making me really sit there and panic about my choices. Like Resident Evil 2, clinging to those safe rooms in the Resident Evil 2 remake in her first half of the game, and desperately trying to plan my route, and then having to respond to unexpected bad news along the way between Lickers and Mr. X. Definitely hit that mark. But like the primary franchise that's been able to successfully make this actual survival horror element a consistent part of the game all the way through is probably Pathologic. Like Pathologic 2, it's like, fuck. How do I get an egg? 2, I need an egg.
Yeah, genuinely difficult to be resource rich in. Pathologic 1, you can pretty much stockpile stuff if you know when all the resource economy changes are going to happen. But Pathologic 2, I've played that game 4 times now, I think. And there's like just no way to get above the curve in that game. You're always going to be a little bit starved. So I guess we're ending the Signalis spoiler discussion on the extremely potent recommendation to play Pathologic, I guess.
Yeah. All roads lead back to recommending Pathologic 2 again. We're very predictable.
Yes. So play Pathologic, play Signalis, enjoy those games, cherish them for the beautiful art they are.
And see you all next time.